We'll start this meeting at 6 p.m. and we are very fortunate to have Landals that will be leading us in the pledge.
Thank you so much. I have our wonderful student leadership team here, and I have a rock star teacher, fourth grade teacher, Ellen Detman, to lead us in the pledge and the Landals School Song.
And now we're going to go ahead and sleep. Ready, sing.
Thank you, Landals. We will now do the roll call. We have a few trustees who will be attending virtually and may come in session. It's Trustee Lampert will be virtual and may attend in session. And we have President Connolly who will be attending virtually. Other members would like to take official roll?
Laura Berman.
Laura Blakely.
And Chris Chang here, filling in as facilitating in President Connolly's absence. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
I move that we approve the agenda as presented.
I second.
Although, is there any members of the public who wish to speak about the approval of the agenda? Yeah. If not, there's a motion. All those in favor of approving the agenda?
Aye.
Yeah, that passes unanimously. We have to approve the virtual attendance of our trustees here. We can pull up the language. Yeah. The approval of AB 2449. I'm going to suggest we amend this to add Trustee Lampert as well. So is there a motion to approve this allowing open the teleconferencing and with the addition of Trustee Lampert along with Trustee Connolly?
I make a motion that we approve AB 2449 for Trustee President Connolly and Trustee Lampert to allow them to join our meeting remotely.
Second.
Are there any members of the public who wish to speak on this item of approving AB 2449 to allow this teleconferencing? If not, there has been a motion and a second. So all those in favor of approving 2449?
Aye.
Thank you. It passes unanimously. We are then back to our special guest, Landals, for a school showcase.
Thank you so much. My name is Peter Dolmans, and I am the principal of Landals. This has been my third year at Landals, and it's my great privilege to be here tonight to talk about some of the wonderful things that we do at Landals and to give you a little taste of what that looks like. So when thinking about what I wanted to showcase, our reading instruction really was top of mind. And so many of you know that we use the Orton-Gillingham program and that we are very committed and passionate about the science of reading. And I know that the district and Dr. Nguyen have done a lot of groundwork in explaining what that is and the research and the science behind it. But we wanted to showcase a little bit of what that looks like. So our presentation really is around what that looks like in the classroom and the kind of results that you can see with such a program. All of our kinder and first grade students receive reading instruction through Orton Gillingham. And even all the way up until 4th and 5th grade, if students are struggling, they will receive OG intervention. OG meaning Orton Gillingham, not Original Gangster. But I have two wonderful rock star teachers here tonight. I have a 2nd grade teacher, Kate Schnauzer, and I have Melanie Sherman, our RSP, and they are going to talk a little bit more about Orton Gillingham.
Hello. Oh, amazing. Okay. Thank you for your introduction, Principal Dolmans, and hello, everyone. In the summer of 2022, I attended an Orton Gillingham training, and for the last 2 years, I have served as the 2nd grade reading intervention teacher. So I'm here to showcase some of our amazing students. Stephen and Jasmine are both here, and we are here to show you all of the growth that they've made after a year of OG instruction. Before I can talk to you about their OG practice, we have to touch on the science of reading. Next slide. Oh, next slide. Perfect. Thank you. Science of Reading is not a specific program, but instead a body of work that teaches us how students learn how to read. So instead of it being, so the Science of Reading states that the best practice for reading instruction consists of a variety of components. Those components are phonological, phonemic awareness, phonics and word recognition, as well as fluency, vocabulary, and reading comprehension strategies. Thank you. Next slide, please. So we know that OG is a research-based approach to teaching reading. OG is explicit, meaning that it is organized in a way that is clear for teachers to teach and clear for students to understand. We also know that students have a variety of preferred learning styles, and OG really does encompass all of those. Students may be visual or auditory or kinesthetic learners, so having the OG multisensory approach is really beneficial for all students learning. OG is also structured in a scope and sequence, which is my personal favorite part. The lessons are presented in a specific order, and then they are increasing in complexity as students achieve mastery. They also spiral review, so every lesson you're reviewing what you learned from the previous lessons, which is really beneficial to ensure mastery continues. OG is also assessment driven, meaning that teachers are assessing their students initially and throughout, and students begin instruction where they need it. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Kate. The 3-part drill is the initial part of the OG lesson and is completed within 9 minutes. It consists of a visual, auditory kinesthetic, and blending portion. It's interactive and integrates multiple modalities of learning that captures the diverse needs of all students. Each part reinforces the other, building accuracy and automaticity, which leads to reading and spelling fluency. So in the first clip, you'll see the visual portion of the sequence. I hope the audio works.
M says O says ah, O can also say O. P says p, B says b. M says O says ah.
And then in the second clip, you'll see the auditory or the kinesthetic portion.
Shake, spell t. T says t. Shake, shake, spell H says shake, shake. 2 letters make this sound. The sound is sh. S-H says sh. Shake, shake. 2 letters.
And the last clip shows our blending.
Ought, hot. Ought, not. Ought, rot.
Thank you. Next slide, please.
M says spell O says O can also
This is one of our students, Steven. When we began reading groups, he was working on letter sounds and blending CVC words. If you could please play clip 1.
and Todd. Tom had a cat. The cat is one.
Now he is learning how to decode open and closed syllable words in clip 2.
Joe and Dennis had to have a muffin for a picnic. There was no muffin mix, so they had to go to a shop to get a mix.
From these videos, you can see how greatly his fluency and confidence in reading has improved. Great job, Stephen. Next slide, please.
Joe and Dennis.
So through OG instruction, Stephen has also improved his ability to write. The goal of the assessment is to check for student mastery of the skill we learned earlier that week. As you can see in September, Stephen needed support in medial vowel sounds, beginning and ending letter sounds, as well as sentence dictation. In March, Stephen has mastered medial vowels, beginning and ending sounds. His sentence dictation has also improved. Amazing work, Stephen.
Perfect. Next slide, please. The next student that we decided to showcase today was Jasmine. Jasmine came into second grade reading at an early first grade level. So she was focusing on digraphs such as TH and CH. And she was also working on her short vowel blends. If you could play the first clip, please.
Has a fish. He had to get a dish for the fish. The dish was in the shade at the shop. Josh did a mad dash to the shed for the dish. Josh hit his shine on the shit. It was a big dash on his shit. Ouch. Ouch. Ouch, said Josh.
Thank you. And then now you can see that Jasmine has mastered decoding multisyllabic words with beginning and ending blends, along with vowel teams and endings. Jasmine's fluency has greatly improved, and so has her reading comprehension. Please play the second slide.
The fun weekend. My friend Ralph and I were needed to go have a fun weekend trip. We were going on a Friday. We were going to a quiet place outside of the city. We were so happy to go that we began honking and singing on our way there. We were going to have a nice time. We went camping. Ross spent time fixing up the tent. He got the sleeping bags in the tent. At last, the campsite was all set up for us. We had everything we needed. While Ross was fixing up the tent, I was grilling the meal. Ross was sniffing the good smell. He said, "Ray, I am smelling a good meal. I am hungry."
Nice job, Jasmine. Thank you. Next slide, please.
Has a good, he had to get a good friend.
So this next slide is showcasing Jasmine's writing development across the year. You can see that she's now able to dictate by sounding out and encoding words that are multisyllabic. She is able to spell words that include blends, vowel team diphthongs, endings, and suffixes, all with increased accuracy. We're so proud of Jasmine for her writing progress this year. Next slide, please. So as you can see through the amazing work of our two students and our Orton Gillingham program, our students are shining and they have really, really benefited from explicit reading instruction. Currently, 8 Landals teachers are teaching with the OG method and 6 teachers will be getting trained this summer. And we are all so proud to work at a school site that prioritizes reading instruction and reading intervention. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kate and Melanie. And I just have one slide left. And this is one of my favorite things to do all year. I like to put together everything that we've done over the year and celebrate our accomplishments and kind of look back and reflect on all the wonderful things that we've done. So if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide and playing that highlight reel so you guys can also see.
What a year we had. I am so proud of our students and staff for all that they accomplished. Our students embarked on an enriching journey of exploration and personal growth. They have demonstrated remarkable progress in improving their academic skills through dedicated effort and perseverance. In addition to academic achievement, our students have shown a deep commitment to taking care of our school and each other. Through various initiatives and projects, they have demonstrated a sense of responsibility and pride in maintaining a safe and supportive learning environment for all. I have always said that our diversity is our greatest strength. At Landals, we celebrate the rich diversity of our student body, fostering a welcoming and inclusive environment where everyone feels valued and respected. Our students have embraced the opportunity to learn from one another's unique perspectives and cultural backgrounds, enriching their understanding of the world around them. One of the highlights of the year was our annual walkathon, where students enthusiastically participated in raising money for many meaningful experiences provided to us by the PTA. And let us not forget all the parent volunteers who gave their time and energy for the betterment of our students and school. We could not do this important work without you. We worked hard this year, but we also played hard. Our students have had fun while learning valuable life skills, engaging in hands-on activities, collaborative projects, and interactive learning experiences. Whether through sports, arts, or extracurricular activities, they have discovered the joy of learning and the importance of teamwork, communication, and problem solving. I'm so proud of our students and our staff. We've done amazing things, supporting each other each step of the way. At Landals, we have embraced a holistic approach to education, focusing not only on academic excellence, but also on personal growth, cultural appreciation, community service, and life skills development. We are proud Landals Lions, and we thank you for a great year.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you to our students, our staff who helped with this event, everybody that showed up. And thank you to the district for encouraging us with the science of reading. We're excited to continue on that journey with the new curriculum. And thank you, trustees, for your support in us as well.
Thank you, Landals. And The rest of the meeting can be quite long. So you're welcome to stay or go. But before that, just know students, you're always welcome to come back to you and share your opinions by coming to speak or emailing the board. Before we continue the rest of the meeting, let's take a moment if you want to take a photo. We have our board members here. Any students and staff, do you want to take, I know you just took one before, but do you want to take one last one or? Okay, so let's come out for a formal official photo and then you're welcome to stay or go. Look at that. Oh. Trustee Lambert, cat rescue, like the cat. Okay. Thank you. For the record, we have Trustee Lambert joining us in person now, joining in from teleconferencing, and then we have President Connolly, who is online. Our next item is the consent agenda. So items of the consent agenda are considered routine and will be approved in one motion. If discussion is required, the item will be removed for separate consideration. Are there any questions on the consent agenda? Or
Just for the record, staff has submitted a revised personnel report.
thank you. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak on the consent agenda? I see one speaker, so we can put up a timer for 3 minutes. And is there anyone else? So it looks like there's just that one speaker. It would be, when the timer is ready, it will be a *6 to unmute. So one moment, please. Thank you. The phone number ending in 8176.
Thank you. This is former trustee Stephen Nelson. I would just like to comment on the item F, which is the consent accepting the parcel tax report. I think this report is a great example of good reporting to the public. I sent a congratulation to the chief financial officer earlier today. One of the nice things about this, though normally I don't like really long, many item, small numbers on a report, this is a really good example of getting the public what it's going to need to know to support a coming parcel tax. It shows very exactly which people by name are being supported in their salaries for which programs that the parcel tax was promising to support. Having that kind of information early allows us to look at it, allows people who want this new version of a qualified special tax that's a per square feet to have some real numbers and real people names to go with where this tax money goes to. There is always the question of where's our money being spent? How's it being spent? This parcel tax report in its minutia shows that, and in its summaries, which are and totals for the different portions, really shows it also. So this is an excellent job. I think a report like this will help convince the community that this parcel tax is a tax that should be supported. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment. Is there discussion or a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Trustee Chang, oh, were you first? I'm sorry.
I was just going to move. So.
Oh, I just wanted to thank both Patrick Neslaba, who chaired the Parcel Tax Oversight Committee, and James Perkins, who chaired the Bond Oversight Committee, and all of the various parents and teachers that served on those committees, because it's a lot of work wading through all that paperwork, and I just wanted to thank them for their efforts. It's very appreciated. And with that, do you want to move?
Move that the board approve the consent agenda.
Second.
A motion and a second. A motion by
Oh,
trustee Lambert,
trustee-
and second by trustee Blakely.
Trustee Conley has her hand up.
Oh, President Connolly? Oh, is
Thank
that-
you. Yeah, that's fine. My audio is cutting in and out, so I'm getting like every other word. My connection is not great, so I might try turning off my screen or the video to see if I get, better connection through that. But I just want to let you know I'm here, but I'm having trouble hearing what's going on.
And President Connolly, please, if we don't notice if there was something you want to say or jump in, please just jump in with that. So we have a motion by trustee Lambert, second by trustee Blakely. So all those in favor approve the consent agenda?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. And it looks like yeah, this vote. We'll move on to communications. Are there any employee organizations here to present to the board? Are there any district committees here to present to the board? And then last is superintendent.
All right, good evening. Got a couple of sort of high fives as well as a couple quick updates. But first and foremost, let me start and congratulate Cindy Nguyen, who actually earned her doctorate and went to a graduation ceremony today. So she won't be here for the next presentation, but we do want to take a moment to congratulate her. We also have another principal who will be receiving a doctorate soon, and so we'll announce them at the next board meeting. I also want to welcome Mr. Benavidez, who is the new principal of Ground Middle School. Information about him is coming out pretty soon. I also want to welcome Dr. Salvaggio, who is our new Director of Special Education. His bio will be sent out later on, as well as Dr. Scott Wilbur, who will be the new principal of Castro Elementary. So just want to welcome all those individuals to the team. And then just a couple of other quick high fives. So the Association of California School Administrators, Region 8, recognized 16 education professionals and partners for their exceptional leadership traits and valuable contributions to education in the region. Our Director of Equity, Megan Pullman, was recognized for her work with teachers and students around our Better Together initiative. And MVWSD created culture and climate program based on district data. I also want to say that Ground Middle School hosted its 7th annual Grammys Film Festival on the 8th with more than 170 nominees. And the 2024 Best Overall Film was awarded to Mital, Chase, and James. And we'll be putting links out so that individuals can check them out. I also want to note that there were some therapy dogs over at Therakoff. So students had some awesome surprise on Wednesday, thanks to our at-risk coordinator, Ms. Irma, as well as volunteers from the Palo Alto Humane Society's PAH's PALS program. Students spent some quality time during lunchtime with the dogs. And then finally, several Mistral students competed in the Math Kangaroo competition on March 21st. The following students got a top 20 score in national recognition. Ira received 4th place. Antonio was 7th, and Selena was 18th. Additionally, the following students were very close to ranking nationally, more in the top 10%, and that's Sin, who earned 23rd, and Nico, who was 24th. So congratulations to everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Ruff. Our next item is the community comments. This is a time reserved for the community to address the board on items that are not on the agenda. The board administration welcomed this opportunity to listen. However, in compliance with the Brown Act, the board is not permitted to take action or to speak on non-agenda items. Are there any members of the public online or in the room? We see a card here. If we can hand this up to the dais. Thank you. And we have one online. We'll take another moment to see if there are any more. So we currently have two members wishing to speak. And we will start with the in-person. It will be 3 minutes, up to 3 minutes. And Mr. Lev, thank you. When you come up to the podium, if you can make sure that, oh, thank you, Trustee Blakely, for making sure it's on.
Thanks for hearing me. I'd just like to bring to the attention of the board that May, amongst many other things, is also Jewish Heritage Month. We've seen the district acknowledge several other important events that are happening in May. Specifically, Jewish Heritage Month was not acknowledged as far as I know. If it was, and I'm mistaken, that would be great. If it wasn't, I think the Jewish community would appreciate having it acknowledged. Just like other things that are happening in my Maine have been acknowledged. I understand not everything can be noted. I just think noting some things and ignoring others sends a problematic message. So I'd appreciate it if you could address that. Thank you.
Thank you. And we have a speaker online. So ending 8176. The timer is ready. So if you can star 9 to unmute, we welcome your comment.
Trustee Chang, as chairing this, you forgot to ask for community comments after the superintendent's comments. Do you understand what I'm talking about? Can you hear me?
Noted. Thank you.
Okay, so I did have a comment then. So I hope you let me go over the 3 minutes because I also have a community comment. The comment on superintendent communications is, I think it would be a good idea if the superintendent is commenting on a particular beef he has and how he has been treated, or, you know, in some cases, I'd agree with him, really mistreated by a few community members. It is really not policy. I think he should really keep these personal comments, which need to be stated, but keep them at the time for when the superintendent is making comments. Then those personal comments and ramifications don't quite get as mixed up with public policy having to do with other things. Now, hope you give me another 3 minutes because that was the time for public comment after that. I don't think this will take 3 minutes, but what it has to do with is we know in our middle schools that the SED and Hispanic families groups still have academic gaps at the middle schools. These are significant academic gaps. They haven't closed they didn't close over the last 2 years. They're running under what the improvements are in certainly Los Altos district. And they're running under what I think the board has said is their long-term policy of trying to make the academic gaps between the two biggest affected student groups, the Hispanic group and the SED group, start to approach the white and Asian and non-SED groups. So I hope you realize that this issue in the middle schools is part of what's driving some people to think some kids are not getting the appropriate amount of extra instruction that they need in the middle schools. Oftentimes, guess what? You don't hear from those parents. Parents who are poor, parents whose main language at home is Spanish, really don't show up at your board meetings. And that's just the way life works, but it also has to do with how poor your Spanish outreach is. Last time I checked, there was no translations.
Former trustee Nelson, you have about probably, I think we can count about 90 seconds left. So if you want to finish your comment. Thank you, former trustee Nelson. Is there something else you want to say for the last 90 seconds of your public comment?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Yeah, I was talking about Hispanic primary language families. Realize that they are legally supposed to get the translation of, for instance, their school site or student plan for, anyway, the school plans for student achievement. That goes for Castro, Darracroft, and Mistral. They're all well above the 15% Spanish-speaking family limits that the federal and state law requires. Yet you're not meeting that. You wonder why you're not getting Spanish family input? That's one of the reasons why. You're unfortunately violating the law that requires translation into Spanish. Thank you.
Thank you. And we are on to our first review and discussion item, which is our first item is the PK and TK and K-5 English Language Arts and Curriculum Adoption Recommendations.
Good evening. So Ms. Director Dugar is actually going to present on this, but I do want to just point out just a couple of really amazing things. So, last year when we were looking at our data, we noticed that there were significant issues at 4 of our sites around literacy attainment. And so this year we created an early intervention team, and we went out and asked teachers as well as our curriculum team to sort of look at the science of reading and sort of investigate sort of what comes next and whether or not we could adopt a curriculum for pre-K through 5. To my amazement, and I know this is, I think, our 4th adoption in the district, but this is by far the largest number of teachers I've ever seen on the committee, including that they met on Saturdays, which was really impressive. And so there were 27 teachers in total who were part of this, as well as 2 parents. Ms. Dotson, I believe, is here, and Mr. Petty, who also serves on a completely different committee, which is just really amazing. And I know, I just want to say on behalf of the district office, you all sacrificed a lot. You piloted, you met on the weekends, you had vigorous debates, you went through as many curriculums as possible, all on the behest of a request to change outcomes for our kids. So thank you so much for the amazing work you've done. And then again, I know Santa and Swati are going to do Sydney proud in her absence because she's walking across the stage or walked across the stage. But I'm super excited that so many people were invested into making this a reality and that it will start yielding results pretty soon. So I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Ellard and Ms. Dugar to talk about the science of reading. I think they may even ask teachers to step up and answer questions. Maybe not.
Good evening, trustees. It is a pleasure to be here this evening. I just want to make sure all of you can see my screen, okay? Perfect. Thank you. It is a pleasure to be here. And like Dr. Rudolph said, after a full year of dedicated work with our teachers, with our parents, and with our district office team, and under the guidance of our Chief Academic Officer, Kathy Bauer, we are so excited to come up and present the recommendations of the English Language Arts curriculum adoption for preschool, transitional kindergarten, and kindergarten to 5th grade. Our work with the curriculum adoption is aligned with our strategic plan, goal 1, which is providing effective and consistent instructional practices that meet the needs of all of our students. I'm going to take a quick look into the background for our curriculum adoption process, as well as all the things that were related with science of reading. We're going to quickly go over this because by now, with all of our presentations on science of reading, I'm sure you'll be like, oh, I remember that. So we'll quickly go through these things. But our goal for the K-5 ELA adoption was, as we moved from balanced literacy to adopting a structured literacy approach at our school district, our goal was to be able to adopt a curriculum that was rooted in the science of reading and one that met the needs of all of our students, all of our student groups. So what does that mean to be rooted and aligned with the science of reading? Well, it means that we would love to have a curriculum, or we want to have a curriculum that helps students be skilled readers as they become increasingly automatic in their word recognition skills and also become increasingly strategic in the use of their language comprehension skills. And the word recognition skills, or the phonics instruction as we know it, should be explicitly taught, it should be systematic, cumulative, and it should be responsive to building the brain's word area form. And you see the picture at the bottom of the page for that. The science of reading also emphasizes the importance of background knowledge, and that has a very significant impact on students' reading comprehension over the years. And in order for it to provide educational equity and access for all students, we need to build the background knowledge, not just in one area, but in sciences and humanities, in history, arts, and literature. Similar to our K-5 adoption, the goal for our pre-K and TK curriculum adoption was to adopt an integrated curriculum that was not only built from the science of reading, but also had the early childhood learnings that followed the continuum of play-based learning, something that would help our students from pre-K, TK as they go into kindergarten and beyond. So some of the guiding principles for early childhood curriculum was that after spending so much time with the science of reading and learning about it, our adoption committee wanted to use those learnings as early predictors of reading ability. So skills such as ability to manipulate sounds, which is necessary for word recognition. Another big predictor for science of reading for us was building the background knowledge and vocabulary. And the guiding principle for us was to have meaningful integration with age-appropriate vocabulary and background knowledge. Also, spending significant time learning about different topics in early childhood helps students build their vocabulary knowledge and get background knowledge on a variety of topics, which ultimately helps students learn to read in later grades. We know that socioeconomic factors such as family income or parent education do play a role in students' lives. But we also know that research has shown that schools can close the word gap with intentional instruction, playful learning, and having adult-student interactions. As we move on, Santa, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Swati. So good evening, Board President Conley and trustees. We are, like Dr. Rudolph said, so proud to share with you the work of the amazing adoption committees this evening. So I'll briefly go over the process that the Elementary Curriculum Adoption Committee followed. So the committee includes teachers and TOSAs from throughout the school district, parents and district office staff. All grade levels were represented, as well as representation from the dual immersion program. And this crew began their work in September and spent 34 hours in dedicated meetings and trainings, including, like Dr. Rudolph said, 3 full Saturdays. Teachers piloted 2 curricula, which we will talk a little bit more about. And we also held several opportunities for public review of the curricula options. Here's a quick snapshot in the next slide that depicts the process and timeline we followed to get to the final two, which I will share more about. So the first pass, the committee started with a long list of essentially all available elementary ELA curricula options, and they used both the Ed reports and the Science of Reading principles to determine which options would make it to round two. And you can see on the bottom left the 8 options that made it to the second round. The committee then established the MVWSD must-haves list and curated a custom rubric by pulling items from already established vetted rubrics. They scored the 8 options against this rubric, and after this round, the 4 options on the left made it on. The committee then curated a second rubric to rate the 4 options against the content and pedagogy criteria they established by grade bands. And after this round, the final 2 pilot curricula were selected: Amplify Core Knowledge, Language Arts, and McGraw-Hill Wonders. Finally, the committee created a pilot rubric, implemented both options during the individual pilot windows, and rated both options throughout each pilot. Each pilot lasted 6 weeks long, and the committee came together for mid-pilot check-ins during both windows. One note about the process: during each round, the committee not only rated the curricula options, but also discussed varying viewpoints and rationales before coming to final decisions along the way. And while the 3 of us, Director Dagger, Director Nguyen, and myself facilitated conversations, we did not participate in the voting and ranking process for any round. And with that, the committee is excited to recommend Amplify Core Knowledge, Language Arts, CKLA, tonight, specifically because like Director Dagger mentioned, it is built from and embodies the principles of Science of Reading. It's engaging content, easy to use materials, and the diverse representation across the text. And the 3 of us actually had the opportunity to observe teachers piloting both, and we had the pleasure of hearing from students as well. And one student asked me why I was visiting the class, and after I shared what I was doing, she said her vote was for Amplify. So, supporting. Teachers will also be supported to successfully implement a new curriculum. New teachers will receive Science of Reading training during new teacher orientation in August, and all elementary teachers will receive curriculum training in August for the adopted curriculum. All elementary teachers will also receive PD and support throughout the year during district PD days, site-based coaching and PD, and also through optional district-wide literacy PLCs. The new district-wide grade level literacy PLCs are facilitated collaboration opportunities for grade level teachers throughout the school district to come together about every 6 weeks to receive support in planning for upcoming units. Teachers will receive background literacy knowledge and preparation support for teaching upcoming units, as well as support in lesson planning.
That takes me to talk a little bit about the pre-K TK integrated adoption process. It was similar to our K-5 adoption, and we have started our work with the Science of Reading PD, or professional development for our pre-K TK teachers, in November. And then we went down to the rubric development in December with the team. And in January to April, mirroring the K-5 adoption, the TK pre-K adoption team as well piloted 2 curricula. One was the creative curriculum, and the other one was 3 cheers. And after the piloting was done for the both curriculums, we had at the end of April, discussions and rubric findings were talked about. And as Dr. Rudolph mentioned at the beginning, we had heavy discussions about why or why not should a curricula go forward and what were the criteria. And then the pre-K TK team is also finally making a recommendation to the board for approval. The 2 curriculum that we had were chosen using Head Start rubrics and ratings. The 2 curricula, like I mentioned, Saba's 3 cheers and Teaching Strategies creative curriculum. Similar to the K-5 adoption team, the TK pre-K pilot team also reviewed and vetted research-based rubric from the Oklahoma State Department of Education, and they determined the criteria to make our own pilot aspects. such as including alignment with CDE's Preschool Learning Foundation, having integration of content and skills, having dual language development. Importance was placed on the family and home connections as well as scaffolding, interventions, and extensions opportunities. So here we go with our pre-K TK committee recommendation. After extensive study and piloting, the committee would like to recommend SAVAS 3 chairs for pre-K and TK curriculum adoption. And the reason the committee recommends SAVAS is, first and foremost, it's aligned with the science of reading. It focuses on language development, it focuses on skills-based experiences, and also has the integrated continuum of play-based learning, which is the key to pre-K and TK learning. We talked about the importance of oral language development, the importance of background knowledge and vocabulary, and SAVAS, the committee believes SAVAS provides these opportunities through rich discussions and varied groupings. And during the pilot phase, they actually had experiences with all of this. The teachers also felt that SAVAS, the materials were easy to use, they were more culturally responsive, and had the advantage of building routines with repetitions, which is what the science of reading emphasizes, is building those routines and repetitions. Additionally, having the same curriculum for our TK and pre-K allows for increased collaboration with the teacher teams that share students as well, from preschool going on to our TK classrooms. Same as Coordinator Allard mentioned earlier, it is said, right? Any initiative is as successful as the training provided to make it successful. So we're putting heavy emphasis on our new TK teachers that who will receive the science of reading training during the new teacher orientation days in early August. So they can be at par with all the other rest of the team that we have here. All of our pre-K TK teachers will receive the curriculum training during the August teacher PD days. And much like the K-5 teacher PLCs, there will be joint TK pre-K PLC teacher teams as well. And teachers will get support from our early education coach, their own site elementary coaches, as well as our preschool director, Miss Kemper. She does trainings as well. So as we're thinking of this, what are some of our considerations that we do need to keep in mind? As we shift from balanced literacy to structured literacy models, ongoing PD or professional development and reflections will be very quintessential. We know that as we learn any new curriculum, it's going to take time. And hence, we will phase out the various components of the two curriculums for pre-K, TK, for our K-5 as well, over 2 years. And the core curriculum components in the K-5 for year 1 will be the core pieces, and the ancillary or supplemental components will be year 2, once the teachers are comfortable with their core components.
So some next steps. We are seeking approval from the Board of Trustees on the curriculum adoption for implementation starting next school year for both Amplify CKLA in grades K-5 and SAVAS 3 Cheers in preschool and TK, which will come back to you at the next board meeting for decision. And we will continue to provide ongoing PD, as Director Dagger mentioned, for all teachers, elementary and early childhood, as well as leaders. And members of the public have another opportunity to preview the curriculum samples in 2 upcoming dates, Wednesday, May 22nd and Thursday, May 23rd. And lastly, we will follow the formal discard process for our current elementary ELA curriculum. And here's a picture of both committees working hard and happy, from Director Dagger, Director Nguyen, Director Kemper, and myself. A humongous shout out to the team who's here tonight, and appreciation for the time that they invested for our students. So we thank you. And also a special shout out to Dr. Nguyen, who's not here. She was a huge part in making this all happen. And we appreciate her and hope we made her proud. So with that, we open it up for questions.
Thank you to the entire curriculum adoption team. Are there members of the board who have questions? Trustee Lambert.
Yes, How do you assess whether this curriculum or how this curriculum sort of merges into the existing curriculum for the first grade and second grade? So there's a sort of continuity in the learning process.
I can take a stab at it. We are shifting our teaching literacy and early literacy skills from balanced approach to a structured approach. So when we're moving from the balanced approach, we needed to adopt this curriculum, and it's different. I have to say it's very different from what we have currently with Benchmark Advance, because it's a different approach to teaching phonics instruction and word parts, and extending to even reading the text and applying the text. So it'll be a little different, and hence the emphasis on professional development.
Trustee Perrin?
On those dates, I'm excited that the public can come view the materials, and the dates were listed on the slide. Did it have a location for those?
Yeah, sorry about that. That will be at the district office.
Okay, here. Okay, great.
And we're also going to share a link to on our in the newsletters that will actually, parents will be able to, the community can preview the materials online as well if they're not able to make it. I just got those links recently from the consultant.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
I had a question about the cost to implement the new curriculum. And perhaps this is for Dr. Rudolph. Will there be any kind of adjustments to our budget we'll need to make sure we can properly fund it?
I know Ms. Bell may want to chime in here. I know we talked about there's a possibility of a cost savings, but I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, so this is already, we had already put the assumptions in the budget, so there won't be an adjustment to the budget, and we're within our budgeted amount for the adoption of the curriculum.
Thank you. Any other questions? Are there members of the public who wish to speak on the curriculum adoption? Let's see one hand online, and we'll continue to see if there's anyone in the room or online. So it looks like we have one speaker online, and we'll set a timer for 3 minutes. Thank you. And the speaker, Liu, if you *9, thank you.
Hi, sorry. Thank you so much for this presentation. I'm super excited. Can you hear me? Sorry for that. Hold on. Something's going on with my phone. Okay. Anyhow, I just wanna, I have a few questions regarding this, and also just wanna note like a nice shout out to Mr. Ethorn, who actually introduced me to the science of reading and the OG. When my child was, when he was at Stevenson, teaching my child, and they struggle, and this has helped a lot. So I'm super excited about this new curriculum adoption. 3 questions I have is, how will the teachers be held accountable for teaching with the new curriculum?
Anil, you just cut out. You were clear earlier, but now you're a bit choppy. Are you still with us? We don't hear you right now. Anil, if you are hearing this, if you get this, if you can submit your remaining part of your comment in email, and the board will be will appreciate looking for that email with that. Thank you. We'll move on to board comments. President Connolly.
Thank you, Trustee Chang. I just wanted to thank everyone who has participated on these teams, and there was a ton of work and research, and then the willingness of teachers to pilot curriculum. I can't understate how much work it is to pilot not just one, but 2 different curriculum and get feedback from students and also submit your own feedback. So it was a huge undertaking. It's very, very much appreciated. And I'm really excited about, moving forward in our literacy curriculum to better support students.
Okay. Looks like everyone's very excited. If no further comments, and I have a brief comment is that enthusiastic about. I think a lot of people in the community and parents will be excited to learn about this. So perhaps after it's approved, I think any information we can give parents to help them understand what the curriculum is. I think parent communication, especially when it comes to reading, is something a lot of parents are excited to learn about because a lot of times parents would like to kind of synergize their forces at home on supporting literacy with what is being taught in the schools. So I think any kind of parent materials, I think will be readily appreciated by the community. Thank you for this item. We will move on to.
Can I make one?
Oh, yes.
Sorry.
Trustee Berman.
I had a little note to myself. I agree with President Conley and with Trustee Chang. I'm supportive of both of those ideas. And also just want to acknowledge that, that the pre-K, TK, just how incredible it is that we have an opportunity to start working with our students at a younger age to help them be prepared for the rigors of reading as they grow into first graders, second graders, eighth graders. And I'm really glad to hear that the curriculum that was explored and that we're looking to approve is both based on play-based and based on the science of reading. So I think that's really excellent. So thank you to the committee for doing that work and to the leaders that are going to be supporting our teachers throughout this first year where we implement this new program. I'm really excited about it.
Thank you. And our next item is our strategic plan update. And so we have, this is Dr. Grumpf.
All right. I am going to provide a quick update about the strategic plan, highlighting the annual goals. Just included in the packet and new this year is an evaluation document that shows you sort of how all the different presentations are sort of linked to the different items that we sort of covered. Just real quick, just as a reminder, during the 2020-2021 school year, the Board of Trustees approved Strategic Plan 2027, one MVWSD, one team, one plan. And was a departure from the previous plan is that this was a 6-year plan instead of a 5-year plan that linked both LCAPs together, which we felt was really important for the two to be aligned. And then this also now includes board goals, which are set yearly, that are linked to desired outcomes that are embedded within the strategic plan. And it's also included in the administrator's evaluation. So all of us are tied to our work on this. The dashboard is an at-a-glance accountability measure to help staff, trustees, and the public monitor its progress. And so the progress of our action items or initiatives is what we're going to be talking about. Just to understand the dashboard, we use battery symbols, just so that you are aware. This also helps it to be ADA compliant, just because you can tell how many bars are up there. While we understand the colors may not work for someone that's colorblind, they can at least sort of see it in black and white. So we're glad that we were in the forefront of that. So how do we monitor this? There's a couple ways that we monitor it. The first one is we monitor the progress both in our one-on-ones with myself, but also in huddle meetings. And huddle meetings are actually broadcasted to all administrators so that they can understand what the progress is. It's mandatory for cabinet. It is optional for principals, but most principals actually do join in just so they can stay aware of various initiatives. And then if an item is identified as red, a remediation plan is developed to get the action item on track. I'm happy to announce this year that we have no items in red. We've had it once before, but we haven't had it since. So we do create and present what our remediation plans are. And we do adjust this annually to reflect changes in sort of either the district or the state's priorities. So for instance, prior in 2020, 2021, right before the pandemic, the board had a desire to increase after school programming. And then right after that, the the extended learning opportunities program, ELOP, as we call it, or MVWSD plus, um, was initiated. And so we removed that item from the strategic plan, knowing that we had to work on it in a larger sense. So there are 5 different areas that we focus on: instruction, social emotional, student social emotional health, culture, employees, as well as resources. And what you see in the strategic plan, in the documents now, is we also identify who is the lead on the person. So that way, in the event that there are questions for trustees or for other community members, they can reach out directly to that person to get feedback or to get information about it. So I'm not going to go through each one of these. I'm just going to sort of hit some of the highlights here. It's been a busy year for us. For instance, we exceeded our expectations in terms of implementation of the universal data cycles, as well as the cost processes. I will say that our MTSS and cost team presented their survey results just recently at our leadership team meeting. And one of the things that people express is that they love the sort of the cost process, not so much the data analysis part, but what they did appreciate is the work that comes after it, right? And so this team took the feedback and is working on ways that we can sort of speed up the data analysis part without shortchanging it, but also get more teachers and coaches and administrators focused on. So now that we have the data, now what? Around social emotional health, uh, you'll see a lot more site-based trainings that took place. Coordinator White has been out to various sites providing just different trainings based off of the items. We also included this year for the first time in our strategic plan or in our site plans, the actual goal for school sites to place line items in for what they would do around sort of the climate or discipline. And they use the data to sort of address those types of items. In terms of inclusive and welcoming cultures, we did roll out the test parent square at Theracov. We noticed that it was a little bit too cumbersome. So this one will actually, even though we completed the item, we're actually going to repilot a different program to sort of test it out and see what comes of it. But we want to make sure that it meets all of our needs, and that is also not too burdensome for parents as well as students and staff. When we think of effective and engaged employees, we have been doing a lot of work to try and differentiate our professional development. We sent out surveys just recently about what other things we can do. You heard from the literacy team, optional professional development around the science of reading has been well received. Our instructional assistants and our classified staff have also talked about some of the work that they've received this year. And the survey results that our Chief Human Relations Officer has put out this year is some great, not only positive feedback, but also some great opportunities for growth for us in terms of what we can do for next year. And then as we think about equitable distribution of resources, I think one of the 2 areas that I just want to highlight, one of them should turn green pretty soon, which is finalizing the greening score and sort of bringing those items. So we talked about this just recently, and this one will continue on because we're now going to take it back out based off of more feedback. We'll get the drafts and take that back out to the community and bring it back probably in the early part of the year. But also just there's still some more work around child nutrition to make sure that it's cost neutral, and then also that we are evolving and instituting a food recovery program. We have to put it in the sort of the 3 trash cans that people can recycle. We, based off the environmental sustainability work group, We know that we want to move to biodegradable items, so we're looking at what the costs of using those are within the school. So there's still a little work that needs to be done. And then obviously, right now it is cost neutral, but we also are monitoring what the state will do and the federal government will do with the child nutrition program, as there's been some indication, at least from the federal side, that they plan on pulling back. But the state has said that they want to continue for the next couple of years. If that does happen, then there's a chance that we will no longer be able to run a cost neutral program unless we sort of revert back to the previous process where individuals pay. So that will be something that we'll have to investigate. And then obviously switching over materials to be more environmentally steward or better environmental stewards is definitely one of the things that we're sort of working on. So what are our next steps? We are going to bring back our LCAP, which is aligned to our strategic plan, and present the findings. So we put the survey results in there. We'll open up the comment period, and then we will start talking about what adjustments we need to make. And then we will make adjustments not only to our LCAP, but also to our strategic plan and bring those back to the board for approval. And of course, the full plan is available on our website.
Thank you, Dr. Rudolph. Are there members of the board who have questions? If no questions, then are there members of the public that wish to comment on the strategic plan? So far, we have one online. We'll allocate 3 minutes. And it looks like it will just be this one. So speaker ending in 8176. If you can wait for the timer to show up. For the, thank you. Thank you. So when ready, you can star 9, and thank you for your comment. So we don't hear you. You can begin when ready. If you can begin, speaker 8176 by. Speaker 8716, you are, when you're ready, if you can star 9 to speak, we do not hear you.
Sorry about that mix-up. This is former trustee Stephen Nelson. I'd like to talk about what's happening on page 1 of this form. It talks about the goal is a decrease by 10 percentage points in not meeting standards in ELA and math. But it adds caveats. It says in significant subgroups not meeting standards. Let's look what that would mean for math, where the Common Core results are readily available. Not meeting in the racial subgroup Asian, 4.5%. You can't decrease that by 10%. That's not meeting at the level 1, it's far behind. In the level 1 for whites, it's 9.2%. In the level 1, the lowest level not meeting, the one that needs the most work. But what is it for Hispanics in our district? It's 55% not meeting standard at the lowest level, level 1. So it doesn't really make sense, looking at what the data actually is, to say both overall and for these kinds of significant subgroups. You can find similar things for socioeconomic disadvantage. So to make this more sense of it, you really have to realize that the Hispanic over Asian ratio is more than 12 times more need help. And the Hispanic over white ratio, you have to realize about 6 times more Hispanics need help just to get out of the lowest level. The lowest level is standard not met, usually by 1, 2, or by the time we get to middle school, 3 years behind the state grade level standard in math. It's not quite as bad in English language arts, but this is why that doesn't make sense to say we're going to raise all boats. It sounds like a Republican, thing from the U.S. House. We're going to raise all boats by giving everybody tax cuts. It doesn't make sense. Please change that. Put the focus where the focus has been needed for the past century, on the poor and the Hispanic in our district, in our community. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment. Are there members of the board who wish to comment on this, on the strategic plan? Yes.
I just wanted to say that I am really impressed by the data cycles and the cost processes. That was a lot of work to get that implemented this year. And from what I've heard sort of anecdotally from teachers and on the Castro, Reimagining Castro committee, it sounds like that was really helpful work and that it's really being, put into action and benefiting our kids now. So I'm really excited about that. That was a lot of work, and thank you.
So I just maybe perhaps to echo that, I appreciate that our strategic plan. As a middle school teacher, I have to help advise my students in goals, and we set SMART goals and specific, time bound, achievable. And our strategic plan, I think, there's a lot of it's set up as SMART goals. I just one comment about I said this I think once in a retreat, but just to kind of echo it again is that I do think that within the goals, some type of visual representation of which goal is weighted to be the most important among any grouping, I think is useful for both people implementing and for the public, because some goals in each category might be a quick one, one might be a really long one. One might be less important, one might be a really important goal. But when they're listed without any weight or, and if it is weighted internally, like if the top one is the most important, that's not clear. So I think among a list of goals, knowing what are the most important goals is just a short piece of feedback. Thank you. If there are any other board comments, then if not, our next item has to do, item C is an appointment process for a new board member as I am moving to Redwood City. And on this one, Trustee Blakely, would you be all right kind of facilitating this one? I actually want to kind of step away for this item. Would you feel comfortable facilitating the board comments on this?
Sure. If that's what you would like, I'm happy to do that. It's harder for Trustee Conley to do it from afar, right?
Yeah, it is because
Okay.
the internet.
No, I'm happy
Okay,
to.
thank you.
Happy
So,
to do that.
I believe there's oh yes.
I was going to say, I'm happy to help, but it's hard for me to see who wants to speak since I'm
Okay.
online.
Got it.
So thank you, Trustee Conley, for stepping in for this, Trustee Blakely for stepping in for this item. Dr. Rudolph, for the present information for the board, is this, I see we have a member of our council.
So we've invited our legal counsel, William Tunick, who helps us on a lot of stuff. We're grateful that we get to spend time with him this evening. And so he's going to go over as soon as we were informed. We reached out to him, President Conley and I, and asked for him to sort of come in and describe what the next steps are. And so I'll turn it over to William Tunick.
Good evening, members of the board, superintendent, members of the public. William Tunick with DWK. Glad to be with you this evening. So as the superintendent mentioned, obviously now that you're anticipating having a vacancy on the board, we want to talk a little bit about what options the board has, what that process might look like, and obviously answer any questions that the board has. I do that sometimes. I tend to hide from them. There you go. That better? Okay, yeah, I know we have folks online. I apologize. So we'll talk a little bit about what the board's options would be given the anticipated vacancy process, answer any questions. So just general overview of what the education code requires in your bylaws as well, which is 9223 is the bylaw that talks about filling vacancies. A vacancy can occur on a board through a number of means usually we see resignations. That tends to be what creates vacancies, but also in a situation where somebody no longer resides or board member no longer resides in the district, that also creates a vacancy. The rules for how vacancies are filled are the same no matter how they're created. Generally, what the education code allows is for a board to either make an appointment or call a special election within 60 days of the vacancy. There's two exceptions to that general rule that are both time-based. And one of them is that if a vacancy occurs essentially pretty much right in the middle of a term, so between 6 months and 130 days before the elections at which the other board seats are up for election, so that would be about the middle of the term, then the board does not have the option to appoint. Instead, the vacancy is filled by you add an extra election at that midterm election. The other exception from the general rule is if a vacancy occurs during the last 4 months of a term, then the position is left vacant. Essentially, the legislature's decided you're too close to the end of the term, so there's nobody gets to fill that seat. Essentially, it just goes to the election in November. One thing that I would highlight, so in this case, the term that we're talking about does end in 2024 this year, but that 4-month deadline runs from the end of the term, not from the date of the election. So it would run back from first Friday in December instead of first Tuesday after first Monday in November, which means roughly August, early August is when that 4-month period starts. So in this case, it sounds like you'd be anticipating the vacancy occurring before that date, which would mean that we'd fall under the general rule and the board would have the option again, either to make an appointment or to call a special election. Although in this situation, if you were to call a special election, that would essentially leave the position vacant until November. I believe that'd be the soonest you could really hold an election. So it would essentially not happen at that point because the term would be over. So as far as the appointment process itself goes, if the board goes in that direction, again, the education code doesn't provide much in the way of procedure. The one thing it does mention, and I see the trustee has excused himself, is that the individual who's leaving the board can't be involved in selecting the individual who's appointed. Beyond that, other than the fact that it has to happen in open session, it's not something going to closed. The education code and the Brown Act really don't say much about the appointment process itself. Your board bylaw has the standard requirements that the district advertise the vacancy if you're going to make an appointment, that there's a subcommittee of board members who do essentially a paper screening of applications to ensure that the individuals are eligible, essentially residency requirement, and also that the board interview candidates at a public meeting and then make the appointment following. So this kind of really the requirements are pretty basic. Beyond that, it's really up to the board on what the process looks like. What I've seen from most boards that go through an appointment process is usually at least a 2-meeting process. And that first meeting, giving direction to staff on the appointment process. Sometimes that involves reviewing, usually it involves reviewing a timeline, but also sometimes the application paperwork, the questions that are going to be asked, that type of thing. But primarily giving staff direction to go forward with opening the application process, advertising, that type of thing. Usually I've seen applications open for anywhere from probably a week to 2 weeks. That tends to be about standard, just because you've got the 60 days, so you don't have that much time to work with. And then the board coming back for a second meeting at which the interviews are conducted and the appointment is made. In many cases, boards will choose to make that a special meeting so that it can be focused solely on the appointment instead of trying to do it as part of a regular meeting. So that's also an option the board has. This can be done, both of those steps can occur at a special meeting or a regular meeting. So that's essentially the overview of the process. I think obviously the board has some flexibility about how exactly it goes about it. We'd have to also talk a little bit about what the timing looks like. But I wanted to give that overview of what the requirements are, the options, and the process. And then obviously, if there's any questions from the board, happy to answer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tunick. I was going to ask if trustees have questions, and I see that President Conley has her hand raised. Please.
Thank you very much, Trustee Bligley. Thank you, Mr. Tunick, for the information that you shared. I have a couple of questions. We don't have an exact date right now for when Trustee Chang is leaving, but is it possible to begin advertising that there will be an appointment process or doing outreach about and noticing about an appointment process before the trustee leaves? Like, can we put some of the pieces in place? I'm worried about it being over the summer and not being able to do outreach to the community to get applicants.
Yeah, so I can go ahead. The short answer to that is yes. In my view, I look at it, the education code allows for deferred resignation as well. So if somebody resigns, they can say, I'm turning my resignation in now, but I'm not going to leave the board for, I think you can go up to 60 days. And during that period, the board can still start the process. And actually, I think you can actually even appoint while that person's still there. In this case, I'd probably recommend if you start the process, that would be fine. You may want to wait to make the appointment until the vacancy's actually occurred, which would either be a resignation or somebody leaving the district. But I don't think that prevents you from starting the process. And the more time you have to do outreach, obviously, the better.
Thank you.
Additional question, Trustee Conley? No? Trustee Lambert?
Just to be clear, it sounds like if we decide to elect a person, I guess by statute we have to hold a special election, but in this case, because of the timing, it really just merges into the general election.
Yeah, I believe so. And especially because the vacancy in this case wouldn't actually occur until the end of June. By that point, you'd be pretty much right on top of your general
And
election.
you could even have a deferred, resignation.
Yeah, exactly. I think the 60 days counts either from the date of the resignation, or if it's deferred, it counts from when that letter is filed. But in any event, you'd essentially it really would be a decision to leave the seat vacant until December, essentially.
Great, thank you.
That's what I was gonna, just for confirmation. So if we decided, we can't really decide to do nothing, like affirmatively, we have to decide so long as we have the timeline to do one or the other. But de facto, if we decide to do it as an election, then that'll just be essentially leaving it vacant.
Yeah, and really de facto, if you do nothing, the default under the education code is the county superintendent has to call a special election, and then we'd end up in the same place. Even if the county superintendent did call it, it'd end up being in November, and it would really not happen. And I just wanted to be clear too on the appointment. I didn't say this before, but if the board makes an appointment, that person only serves in the rest of the term, which is until December. You're not appointing somebody for 4 years. Just I know you did, but for the public as well.
Good to be clear. It sounds like Trustee Conley has another question.
Yeah, I'm just trying to make sure I've got all my ducks in a row and understand this. So let's say in theory, July 1st is the first day that we are without a trustee. within 60 days from there, we would have to do an appointment or a special election, right? Or we would have to.
You either have to make an appointment or call the special election. You don't have to hold the special election within 60 days.
And so calling the special election, and then it doesn't matter because on November that seat is up for election anyways. That's
exactly
legal.
Yeah, and I think we actually had, I believe it was another district in your county that had a similar situation. I want to go back. I want to say it was 6 years ago or so, where essentially that special election just kind of merged into really the election. So we could take a look at exactly how that would work out. But the bottom line is your choices really are appointment for someone to serve through December, or what would effectively be leaving the seat vacant because there's not going to be time to have an election between now and December. And just to the earlier point too about holding those elections, when districts do that, which is pretty rare, the district ends up picking up the cost of that entire election. And those are extremely expensive elections. I mean, it's the same thing as if a bond measure or something like that. They can be hundreds of thousands of dollars. So pretty rarely do you see districts go in that direction just because of the cost.
Right, understood. Just a moment, Trustee Berman. Then, so you said you'd have to look into what would happen then. We don't know, like, we wouldn't have to do, we might have to pay if we said we're gonna essentially defer or no?
No, I know, no.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, exactly how it would logistically work itself out, I wanted to double check, but there's no logistical way to hold an election
Right.
in that time frame.
Thank you. Trustee Berman?
I have the same questions because it is really expensive to run a special election, but it sounds like because we would run right up against November, there wouldn't be an expense for the school district.
Oh, yeah, no. So if you tried to hold a separate election, that's when you pay. But in this
Right.
case,
We
if you
wouldn't.
left it open, it would just be the normal election that would happen in November, and that you're already paying for anyway, basically.
So we'd be a board of 4 until essentially after the election.
Exactly.
And then if we were to try to do an appointment for the 4-month stub period at the end, I remember the last time Trustee Chang resigned during his prior term, I went to the thing at City Hall. You were on the board, Trustee Lambert. There were something like 12 different people. And I remember it was a big deal, a big production.
Probably more like 40 or 50.
Oh, I thought there were like 12 or 14 that evening, but they were kind of like rounds and people were eliminated and it was quite a production. And I'm sure there was a lot more work that had gone on that I had not even appreciated. But when our city council recently was faced with a very similar issue, when Sally Lieber got elected to the Board of Equalization, and they had basically she was 2 years in and 2 years left. So city council is not governed by ed code, so it may be different. But they, did a process where an application process, like you said. And then, I don't know, they must have had a subcommittee or something and reviewed the applications. And then somehow or another, the subcommittee narrowed it down to like 5 or 6. And they didn't even interview some of the people. I know one person that was upset that they were not interviewed even. And I'm just wondering, would we have to interview every single, we could have a bunch of people apply or we could have a handful. And I'm just wondering kind of what's involved in that. Is there any shortcuts where you kind of narrow it down?
The answer is sort of yes, but your bylaw does say that the board shall interview the candidates. So I think, a strict reading of that is that you should talk to everybody. That being said, what I've seen in districts that have had a larger number of applicants is sort of what you mentioned with the rounds, but that even being maybe if you have a lot, everyone's going to get one question, then you're going to go to a second round, maybe a couple more, another round after that, so that you may not get 5 questions to every person if you have 15 applicants, but they'll all have a chance to at least speak to you, I think.
Okay,
so
that's helpful.
There's ways which we can structure that when we see what the applications look like.
Thank you. Any other trustee questions? Okay, are there any members of the public here today or online that would like to comment on this item? If so, please raise your hand if you're in Zoom or submit a card if you are in person. I see we have one hand in Zoom. Dr. Rudolph, will you put the timer up, please? And Mr. Nelson, you can unmute yourself and speak.
Hello, the system you're using tells me I can use *6, so you don't necessarily, if I'm on the phone, you don't necessarily have to say that. I'm Stephen Nelson. Again, I wanted to say that I'm glad you're getting advice from Mr. Turnick. I think he's a gentleman that has helped guide Berkeley through their parcel tax per square foot over the last 15 years at least. And I hope he's the one that's giving you advice on your parcel tax. But I wanted to say, I don't think if there's 5 or if there's 12 people applying for this, we have a superintendent who did this before. He did an excellent job, in my opinion. It went through several different iterations, how he had it set up, worked fine. And guess what? We ended up with somebody, Trustee Gutierrez, who later on, the community decided they wanted to vote. When there was a vote taken, he was the one who was picked to be an elected trustee rather than an appointed trustee. So the superintendent, as the secretary of your board knows how to do this. He's done it before in a great way. It was very transparent to the public what was happening, what the trade-offs were. Me, for instance, deciding I would change my vote to make Gutierrez make the final cut. So I don't think you have any problems. Thank you.
Thank you. So trustees, are there any comments on this? If Trustee Lambert?
Was a question to you, and this is going to be for voting next time? Yes. At the next meeting?
I don't know what the plan is on the governance council.
I'm following y'all's lead, so I think this is for y'all to have your questions answered. If you want it placed on the next agenda, then it can be placed on the next agenda. If you want it on the 13th, you can do that then. So it's up to y'all.
Trustee Berman.
So I think what we're discussing today potentially is maybe the options of calling this special election, which would then, we would basically wait until November, the November election, and then we would have an empty seat for the remainder of the period, or we would appoint. And I think, is that something that we need to decide today? Okay, just discussion.
Just reviewing the discussion today. So it would have to be an action item, I believe, before we could make, a determination to go one way or the other, right? Correct?
If I can, what I'd say is I think if the board wanted to provide direction to move in the direction of an appointment to staff to put it on the agenda either to next meeting or June 13th, that's probably the next step. That would probably be the next step from tonight. And
President Conley, you're the person guiding our team right now, and you have opinions, I see.
No, I was actually just going to say what Mr. Tunick said, which is that the board can set direction tonight on whether it wants to pursue an appointment process or it wants to pursue a special election process. And then at our next meeting, we could bring back that item to kind of finalize how it goes. But it's up to the board. I don't know which way everyone wants to go.
Thank you. Trustee Lambert.
I'm ready to give direction, if accepted. So I am, whenever at all possible in these situations that we can have the public vote on board members, I strongly support that. So I am, I would support going forward with calling a special election with the understanding that it would really just merge into the general election in November.
As long as that doesn't cost us money, I'd be open to that. I'm open to an appointment process, but my concern about that is giving potential candidates an unfair advantage in the election. And, that just somehow doesn't feel right to have four of us kind of, crowning somebody ahead of time. So since it's only 4 months, I'm open. But if others want to have if others feel like they'd like to do a appointment process, I'm open to that.
I would also share that. Go.
Well, can I just interject real quick? So then let's just say in theory, Berman and I disagree with you and we're deadlocked. What do we do? Because there's 2v2. Now, I don't know that that's going to be the case, but I'm just putting that out there. That's my only concern, is that 4 can be a difficult way to get things done sometimes.
I agree, but inherently, since we're by statute a 5-member board, and if one person resigns, we just have 4. I'm kind of agnostic, I guess, leaning a little more towards waiting till the election. I don't feel that strongly. So if you guys feel strongly, you might well persuade me.
I feel similarly as Trustee Blakely. I feel like, it's a short stretch, but I know we always have big decisions to make. And I think if there are conversations coming our way where we feel like we're going to need that fifth member. I mean, we'd have to get that member up to speed on a lot of issues in a very short amount of time, right? So I am comfortable having an open seat for that remainder of the period because it is a shorter stretch. But if we are feeling like when we think about these conversations that are coming in the fall, if we need to have that fifth person, I'm also open to having an appointment too.
And can I make one more comment? One other comment or concern of mine is like, you know, in the grand scheme, how important are priorities and staff time? Our staff puts in tremendous time, and we all heard the extra hours 3 Saturdays in a row. And so if, like, I'm sort of weighing the benefit of having a fifth person, which I think would be helpful, but against the value that, you know, the value that would bring versus how much extra effort do we put on staff where they might be able to spend that on something that is more likely to improve outcomes for kids. Trustee Lambert and then Trustee Conley.
I think President Conley makes a good point about being deadlocked, but I would hope that we could, you know, discuss things further and with that understanding that, you know, we can't be deadlocked. We have to make decisions that we discuss things and keep an open mind and reach, you know, wise judgments.
Fair.
I think we can do that.
I think we can too. Trustee Conley.
Yeah, well, it sounds like board direction is pretty clearly to head towards the special election process. In which case, I guess my ask would be probably for Mr. Tunick to verify that we would not end up having to pay kind of the timing of the special, if we call a special election, the timing of it and verifying that we're not going to have to pay a huge amount of money in November. And then it could come back to be a vote for a call for a special election at, would we need to do it at a board meeting this spring, Mr. Tunick, or would we do it at like our August board meeting because it has to be within 60 days after Trustee Chang leaves?
Yeah, so it would, you couldn't call the election before the vacancy occurred. So it would have to be sometime in July or August at that point. And to the prior question, I could definitely, I was just taking a look and verifying that the statute said what I thought it said. But I think we could definitely verify with the county officials involved that it would work the way that we thought it would and that there'd be no additional cost to the district.
Okay, thank you.
Anything further on this one? Oh, Trustee Chang.
Thank you. I was listening from the room. I had a question about given that my move, and I apologize to board and staff. You know, as a renter on the board, like my budget, it's just hard to be married and have now 3 kids, and so I appreciate people's understanding. My departure is right around that 6-month window. Does it matter which end of that 6 months in order to save? Because, you know, my term ends in November. So this special election is kind of just rolling into what would have been the end of the term. So kind of just further guidance on, given that this is literally at the 6-month bubble, which end of the bubble would be the least, would save the district from having an expense?
Sure. And so just to be clear, the 6-month cutoff that I talked about, that really applies more where we have the midterm, where we have a vacancy middle of the term. When we've got one at the end, we're looking more at that 4-month cutoff. But to your point, just given the board discussion, and it sounds like direction, we can definitely verify and take a look at the timing and make sure that you know, we're not nothing's happening that one day sooner than it needs to, so that we end up incurring costs or anything like that. So we could definitely coordinate and then bring that information back to the board about exactly how it would roll out.
Any other comments? Thank you very much, Mr. Tunick.
Thank you. Thank you, Trustee Blakely. And our next item is our Measure T Construction Priority 2 project list. And
Yep. So I will be taking this presentation from Dr. Westover, who has a personal event going on. So we're here to talk about the Measure T construction priority list, project 2. This is where the board has the opportunity to make a lot of decisions about the remaining funds. There are a couple items that that staff would probably recommend that sort of need to get done, and I'll talk about that when we get close there. But outside of that, the board at this point, you can opt to go with priority 2 items, or you can choose other items that you see fit that would have came out of our master's facilities plan and sort of move those items up. But again, there's just a couple things that we think just are critical that we should just address with the remaining funds. So goal 5, just making sure that we have all students, staff, and community members will have access to various resources such as technology, facilities, furniture, equipment, in a fiscally responsible manner to fulfill the mission. So our guiding principles was by having an approved project list, we avoided costly time delays that impacted Measure G. And that really was about the inflation and just trying to figure out different items. And I know at that time, there was also a debate about would there be a new school, would there not be a new school? And I think that just slowed some of the progress down. Obviously, there were some major projects that sort of moved forward, and then other items just sort of waited until some other decisions could be made. So it's not to criticize Measure G whatsoever. It's just simply saying, I think we were at a different standpoint as a result of not having to decide about an extra school. It also helped to create equitable learning environments, and then obviously through the whole massive facilities plan, it involved a lot of community members in terms of gathering feedback, implementation, as well as solutions. So our first set of projects in the massive facility plans focused on 3 key items: safety, efficiency, and short-term growth. The majority of the projects were completed with a balance of projects being slated to be completed in 2025 of August. Priority 1 projects have been coming in below budget due to savings realized to reduce escalation costs resulting from the district proceeding promptly with phase 1 projects. And a good example of this is that we made the decision to purchase our HVAC systems up front right when the pandemic started, after the bond was approved, and to store those until we could actually start installing them. That helped to reduce some of the costs, right? So it's just simple cost savings that sort of help. But if we wanted to look just in terms of what the escalation that we've seen over the last couple of years, obviously 2021 and 2022, during the pandemic, it was the highest amount of escalation. A lot of supply chain issues occurred, as well as labor stoppages. So that's what drove a lot of the cost increase. But as you can see, since 2021, we've been real close to 10% in terms of multiple items. 2024, so far year to date, is 1.2%, but we are projected to be around 2025, 5.5%. So currently, either completed projects or under contract, we've spent about $123 million. And then if we would have waited 1 year, the cost of these projects would have went up to 139, meaning that we saved $15 million. And if we waited 2 years, then it would have went up by another $10 million, almost $2 million. So the cost is 147. So obviously being able to act fast and leveraging these projects or the list and moving as quickly as possible has definitely helped us. And so what projects have we done? A holdover from Measure G was Mistral front office, perimeter controls, access controls, which we actually do have a phase 2 for that. Paving at Landell, Starakoff, Bub, Amai, and Crittenden. The roll-up door at Vargas, which came out of the pandemic. HVAC units at all of our sites, which was a big plus. Window replacement and operational windows. And then obviously the painting at Graham and Crittenden, which were much needed. Storage at Stevenson and Vargas. Castro was actually removed based off of site feedback. It was just really hard to find a place for there. Security cameras, bottle fillers, outdoor learning, marquee signs at our final two sites. So we installed a sign on the backside of Crittenden, where most people actually drive on Middlefield, considering that Rock Road isn't used as frequently, even though there's a sign that was donated by Google at the time. And then obviously, we placed the sign at Vargas, and then that sign actually had to be moved because the street pole went, or the lamp went up there. So we had to do a secondary sign and then reroute the electric to there. Staff housing as well as solar have also been part of it. Then we've done some electrical work as well as plumbing. The staff parking lot at Castro, upgrades, portables, and then pathways. And then some of the projects that have been removed, originally we were planning for short-term growth, and so we had a design for a two-story building at Landos to adjust for growth. That project was paused. Monoloma plumbing network repairs. This is a good thing about going out and surveying right before we start the project. We noticed that there was no need to do underground utility repair work, so we avoided that one. We also realized that we didn't need to adjust pickoff drop-off reconfiguration, and then portable reconfiguration for preschool with the playground addition was also paused. This slide has been updated. We have been working with the city, and we paused the bathroom project until we finalize the joint use agreement. We are planning on adding restrooms at the following sites: Castro and Straw, as well as Landos. These restrooms are not approved for use by DSA, just because they are really intended for the public, off hours. And the city has indicated that they would like to reimburse the district for 50% of the cost for all of the bathrooms, if we were to move forward. So, what is the funds available? So there are $17 million of unallocated funds, and then we have our contingency program, which we're required to put in place for all of our projects. But because we've been coming in under budget on almost all of our projects, that brings the total funds available to around $42 million. And if we start to look at priority 2 projects, we did do some estimates just so you have ballpark about what things will cost. And we will obviously bring a more refined budget if we were to move forward with any of these. But we just take a look at some of the items that are needed. And these range depending on the school site. There are some that I think are very, that I would put up there. So I think any technology upgrades, considering that we're putting more demand on our optic fiber network, in order to make sure that all of our school sites continue to function as broadcast centers for our CBRS network. So that, as well as roof repairs, I think would be the 2 biggest ones. And then at some of the sites, I would say the covered walkways probably are in need of some attention too. We didn't touch those. So those, if there were anything that I would say, roof repairs, technology upgrades, which is really replacing fiber optic and copper cable networks, and possibly some covered walkways are your biggest ones. But if I had to choose between all 3 of those, roofs would definitely be at the top. Technology upgrades would be number 2, and then covered walkways would be number 3. We've been able to patch the covered walkways. I know it's not ideal, but I think if I'd rather have classrooms that are dry and making sure that we can run our network, because we depend a lot, our phones run on a voice over internet protocol system, which is basically over the internet. A lot of our infrastructure is based off of our ability to work their data system. So I think those are the 2 pressing items. But there's some other items that are up there. We can survey the utilities at Dierkoff, and then there's obviously some restroom modernizations. And then there's the possibility of a kitchen expansion too. So if we were to look at all of these projects and then add in a couple of additional items, so lighting controls, if the district wanted to go with fleet electrification, um, there is an access control project so that we can finalize and complete. Right now, we have it just on the front facing doors. We know that people are getting used to it, but it would be nice to have it on the back doors at the school sites also. So that could be another one. So there's a series of projects that you can choose from. If unfortunately though, if we were to take all of the funds and we were to add in the priority projects as well as the other projects that have been identified, that brings us to a total of $58 million. Then we have to put 10% into contingency, and then we have to add in for the plan for escalation. So similar to Measure G, which had, I believe it was 450 something million dollars on a 180 $198 million bond. There's obviously more need than there is financing. So there are some choices that the board will have to make. There's no way that we can do everything considering that we have about $42 million left. So we did go through and just think about what the recommended projects were. So this is just our recommendation. Again, it's up to the board to sort of take that. So again, I talked about the roof repairs as well as technology upgrades and surveying repairs. So these are really just infrastructure items that we feel like are necessary. I do want to point out the Greening Initiative has its own separate line item. Those funds are not part of this, so you're not making a decision to pull back on the Green Initiative. We've already moved those funds and earmarked those. We just haven't, outside of what we've done at Vargas, we haven't spent any of them. So you're not making a decision in terms of that. And so in this case, if we were to take all of the items we think are recommended, and I do want to just touch on this last one real quick, which are the projectors. So we have our school sites have actually been purchasing projectors, sort rows for the screens. And there's some pluses and minuses to having those. But one of the main issues is that it's at times it can be really hard to place it in the appropriate spot and to use it. It does take also, it creates a trip hazard, some other items. And so we have just went in and explored the use of a permanent rear projector for the multi-use rooms that will allow school sites to use it without sacrificing space. So that is one item that wasn't on there. It's more of it came up during our leadership team meeting about an issue that was taking place. And these are very expensive systems that have been placed in all the MERs as well as in the performing arts centers, just making sure that they're appropriate, have the appropriate machinery. It's just there. But if we were to take that right now, you're looking around $31 million in terms of those, which would leave you around $11 million to play with. Again, if you're asking for us to prioritize different ones, I'm going to fall back on roofing as the biggest priority because that's where in some cases we have exceeded the lifespan of the roof, and it wasn't until just recently when it started raining a lot more that we started to see, and I think all of us, even residents, started to see like, oh, maybe we've been ignoring our roofs for a little bit too long just because we normally weren't in drought season. So I would say that's a definite priority for all of us. So as I said before, it leaves us a little under $10 million, but ultimately this is the board's decision in terms of how you want to prioritize the unallocated funds. You can dedicate it towards any other projects that you can. And then again, there's sustainability projects that can come up. There are playgrounds that you can focus in on, additional greening the sites, as well as other projects. And then, of course, you can, if you want to do classroom additions or something like that, those can also be taken into account. So I would do my best. I know Dr. Westover is not here. I believe, I'm not sure that Jason Cave is here to join us. I will try my best to answer as many questions as possible. I just want to remind everybody, like, I don't live with these numbers every single day, so I can't, I may not be as eloquent as Dr. Westover to answer every single item.
Thank you, Dr. Rudolph. And just want to encourage my colleagues here to take as much time to ask all your questions. We are on our agenda. We've been moving very efficiently through our agenda. This is the last large item for this agenda. And just remind our colleagues that when this comes back in May 30th, once a board approves a priority list, it takes a supermajority based on the resolution passed by the previous board. It takes a supermajority to change it. So this is a big deal. So I hope we take as much time to ask questions and discuss, because this is coming back May 30th. And I see President Connolly for questions. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I do have a few questions. Some of them, I definitely understand kind of the physical plant pieces and prioritizing roof repair and technology upgrades. I do have questions about some of the ones that I think relate to safety. So I'm curious, for example, about the Crittenden Utilities Survey is not recommended to go forward. Could you talk about why?
Oh, I see Mr. Cave is here, so give me a second. And if we could co-host them, that would be great too. There we go.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Yes. So great question. So during the first round of projects, there was a video camera and locating survey done of the underground utilities at Crittenden. And it turned out to be all of the existing utilities were clear. The pipes were in good shape. There were some blockages from leaves and debris and whatnot, which were cleared as part of that survey. So based on the video results and in talking with the MOT director, Brian Perrin, there were no issues identified that needed to be corrected. So that's why that's not on the list.
Did we test the domestic water there then? Because that's listed on the utilities survey and repair.
We tested the storm drain and the sewer, and then testing the domestic water, and in talking, or we didn't, physically test the domestic water, but in talking with Brian and observing the buildings, there were no leaks or deficiencies noted.
Okay, thank you. And then Dr. Rudolph, this may be more of a question for you. When we look at, I think we've replaced most of our aged water fountains across the district with bottle dispensers. Is that the case, that Mistral is the only site left that has kind of the old water fountains in place?
I don't believe, and Jason, you can chime in. I don't think that they got touched during the modernization at other sites, and so those are the ones that have to be. If we change them, they have to be brought up to code. But Mr. Cave, you can.
Yeah, so there's actually a priority 1 project that hasn't been completed yet, which encompasses, I want to say, 16 to 18 bottle fillers across the district, and that's currently in design now. So that will be installed. We'll have to discuss with the district on schedule, but it could be installed probably early 25 or summer of 25 if it wanted to wait till summer. But there is a current project that addresses the remaining bottle fillers.
So Mistral is listed on here as a priority 2 for replacing aged water fountains with bottle fillers, and then it's cut from the recommended list.
I think that's a duplicate in the master facility plan because two of the drinking fountains were replaced at Mistral in early modernization, and the other 2 are scheduled for the project I just spoke of. So it's covered.
Okay. If we can verify that in writing with somewhere, then I'm fine with that. I just
Absolutely, and there will actually be a schematic design presentation for that project brought before the board when it's ready. So okay. You'll see that, but we can certainly document it ahead of that presentation.
Yeah, I just want to make sure we don't cut money for something that we haven't actually funded.
Of course.
But if we've already funded it elsewhere, that's great. And then another question I had was around the walkways. So the suggested covering for the walkways, this was a priority 2 project at Castro. And I don't know if we have, if Principal Kearns is on here or not, but I have this image in my head, and I've seen kids because I'm across the street on a rainy day, which we have had far more of than I have seen in quite a few years, trying to get all of your, class of 25 fourth graders out of the classroom that has no coverage, and you're on that second story walkway, and then you have to get down those really, really steep stairs. Makes me have a little bit of anxiety just watching it from the street. And I'm curious if the school site is concerned about student safety, like kids just trying to rush and it being slick and things like that when it's raining. And that's part of the request for the covered, like the extension over the walkways on the second story.
I think for staff, we felt like we would leave it to the Board of Trustees to sort of prioritize projects. I'm not arguing that it is or isn't worth, the board prioritizing it. I just think if there had to be a decision, my strongest recommendation would be let's stop the leaks in the classrooms, which means let's replace the roofs. But in terms of the other projects, I mean, ideally for staff, we would just move through priority 2, try to stretch the money as far as we could and knock out as many of those as possible. However, I do know earlier this year, a conversation came up just about the board wanting the opportunity to weigh in about what comes next. And so we're just, what I'm saying on behalf of us and Greystone West is that at minimum, we need to replace the roofs.
I'm not disagreeing with that at all. I am asking for a school site weigh in about what it's like when it's raining there on the second story, because it's the only, every other school site in our district has covered walkways for kids when they come out of the classroom. That's all I'm asking.
We know that the school site would like it. The question is this really is what boils down to the board in terms of if this is something that they want to continue as a priority. We're not making a judgment call on it, but the feedback, the reason why it's on there is because the site was very clear, parents as well as staff, that this is something that they felt was needed.
Okay, thank you.
Trustee Lambert?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. It's not a top priority item, but it's certainly a potential item that's significant. Could you talk a little bit about centralizing the kitchen and modernizing industrial arts and home economics classrooms at Graham? Just basically, what's the benefit?
Right. So so when the kitchens were designed, and I'll just go back. So the district went through several iterations, right? So at one point, I believe before I arrived, the district had Sodexo, and then we hired a manager. I forget his name, but I remember we, smiled a lot. It's a very welcoming guy. And then we added in kitchens at every single school site, all the elementaries that were being built. And so we upgraded all those. But what we didn't do is we didn't really upgrade the kitchen fully. And part of that is we upgraded it to the point that it needed to at the time, but we never at that time envisioned providing as many meals as that we needed. And so these upgrades really bring that whole area up to more of a production level standard. It allows for them to expand. And then for the home ec rooms, they really are spaces both at Crittenden as well as at Graham there's spaces that are not currently being used. And so essentially what this would do is it would sort of adjust those so that they can become places that can be used. I don't believe that the vision is for those to become home ec rooms anymore. It's just right now they have stoves and so I'm thinking of the Creighton one, which I was just recently in. They have stoves sort of dispersed throughout as if, so kids would cook and there's a demonstration table. And so it's not useful as a classroom right now, but it's a space that currently is unoccupied that could be recaptured in some type of fashion. Mr. Cave, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to that.
Yeah, I would just say, specifically the one at Graham on the list, I believe was item number 23 on the priority 2 list. That was something that was expressed as a need or a want during the master facility plan when that was put together some years ago. And going through this process recently in talks with Dr. Westover and staff, it didn't seem like that was a project that the district had any desire to move forward with, again, because it's not a program that's widely used or attended throughout the district. So that was the feedback that we received, that it wasn't a need or a want anymore, but it was, at the time the master facility plan was put together.
Okay, yeah, thank you. I have another question. A line item here is playground replacement and expansion, and same applies for additional bathrooms on school sites that don't have bathrooms for the public. So these are pretty expensive items. Do you think that going forward that we can get reimbursement from the city for at least part of the cost of these?
That part, I don't know. We could inquire about the playgrounds, whether they have an interest in paying for half. We can reach out to them.
Okay, thank you.
Trustee Blakely?
Yeah, just a couple of questions. You said that the greening was not part of this, that it's already been basically budgeted for. But on the other needs list, there's frontage greening. Is that separate? Is it $2.5 million?
Yeah, so frontage came up after, sort of after we talked about it. And when we had the study session, it was this was sort of a nice to have. Didn't necessarily, and part of it was we wanted to create welcoming environments. But then there was also a realization like, let's do everything else and then see what needs to take place before we start ripping up concrete again and paying for it. So the frontage will be an additional project that we don't think can get covered with the greening.
Okay, thank you. And I had the similar question about the playgrounds. And then the current bond we passed in, I believe it was March 2nd, 2020, might have been March 3rd, but that's a 7-year bond, is that right? So in 2027, the district would be able to seek another bond? Or I'm just trying to see like how long we can stage these projects. And I don't know that the community would support it, but that timing.
So the Wisman bonds just lapsed or just expired or were officially paid off, which brings the Wisman area in line with the rest of the Mount. So, sorry, Mountain View and Wisman were 2 separate districts, and both districts issued bonds. Mountain View's bonds were serviced differently, and I want to say that they maybe the ones from Wisman were non-callable. It's been a while since I've looked at it, but basically the Wisman area was paying more in taxes because of the Wisman bonds, and Mountain View has been paying a different set. In 2024, this year, all of those bonds the Wisman bonds disappear, and now you just have Mountain View Wisman bonds that are sort of going. And those bonds bring us under the threshold. So if the board wanted to explore another bond, it's just the question, your delay is really tied to how much you want to increase your bonding capacity. However, you can, and we've seen districts do this, and we can get Chet to talk about it. You can issue bonds in excess of what your bonding capacity is. And then once your bonding capacity gets there, you can keep going, right? So you're just limited by the amount of monies that can be there. But that's, so I don't think that there's a 7-year limit. I think it's up to the board to make a determination of when you want to issue the next set of bonds, and then what projects to prioritize.
And that's so long as there's got to be some bonding capacity before we do it. And then, okay, got it. So thank you.
But there is bonding capacity now. I think
Right.
there's like 200 something million.
Thank you.
I had a question about the follow-up from Trustee Lambert about more details about the home economics. So is there, are there existing stoves in classrooms, both at Graham and Crittenden, like a class set of stoves? And the recommendation here is to remove them?
There are existing stoves. We don't have a career technical education program that would utilize it. So home ec falls under the CTE program. So we would need to go through the process to figure out what it would take to hire CTE certified teachers in order to run that program. But yes, there are additional stoves. And I think so this goes back to the schedule change. In 2017, 2018, one of the interests of students at the time were things like home ec, as well as auto shop in other areas. Some of those are not, like you can't run an auto shop at a middle school. That's truly a high school item. But home ec is one of those items that you could run, provided that we would have to start a CTE program.
So the 6 million, those is to convert those into regular classrooms?
No, the other way around. It's to basically modernize and put in new for home ecs and industrial arts at Graham.
So
That was what was noted on the master facility plan.
So trying to understand that that 6 million, would that mean that there are still home ec capacity and stoves at both middle schools at the end of such a recommendation? Or is that transforming the space where there would no longer be stoves at both middle schools?
This particular line item at Graham is to install those spaces at the Graham campus. So in units 5 and 6, where there's 2 classroom pods at Graham, that's to convert those what are now classrooms into home ecs and industrial arts.
So would it be expanding capacity for us to do home ec at Graham?
Correct. That's how this line item is written in the master facility plan.
Are there not currently stoves at Graham? You said there's stoves at Crittenden. Are there not stoves in Graham somewhere else?
Not that I'm aware of, but I can't say that for 100% certainty.
So is that 6 million would bring to parity between the 2 middle schools and what they potentially in the future could offer?
That would to basically take what are existing classrooms and modernize them into home ecs and home economics and industrial arts. And I think it would, for 6 million, I believe it would probably be a little more robust than what's over at Crittenden now.
Thank you. A question about the site input on the final recommendation list. Who at the site levels have provided input in the process on the Project 2 priority recommendations? Is it site councils, teachers, principals? Who's been involved in giving input at the site level before this came to us?
So before any of these items came, this was determined by, and it's captured in the master facility plan. There were a series of meetings as well as surveys and some other items in order to determine. There were site visits, and then there were conversations with staff members. This all occurred prior to the pandemic. And so we're talking about, I think, 2019, when the master facility plan was finalized. However, again, I'll just point out, just earlier in the year, the sentiment from the board appeared to be that you wanted to have sort of provide direction on what comes next. So we haven't adjusted any of these items. We're just simply saying this is how the master facility plan is laid out as it was intended. However, I think my interpretation and when I reviewed my notes was that the board wanted to debate or discuss or maybe provide direction in terms of what comes next. And so we haven't, if we go out to decisive, going to say, yes, these are things we sort of want, but I would prefer to have direction before we come out. So that way you don't feel like we've asked a question and now you've been cornered into saying yes or no, versus if you provide direction to go back out and sort of determine which projects are a priority, similar to what you did just recently with the greening, then we can go through that process. We'll try to do it as fast as possible because obviously we don't want to run into escalation costs. But at this point, we're simply turning this over for the board to provide direction in terms of what comes next with priority two projects. It's not, and the only thing I'm saying is of all of these projects, I think the most critical are the roofs.
I see President Conley has questions. Trustee Berman, do you want to jump in first? President Conley?
Oh, Trustee Berman can go ahead if she needs. That's fine.
The question I had was just answered. So go ahead.
Okay. I had, a question listening to the conversation about home ec, and the fact that we don't actually have a CTE program within our district right now. The Mountain View Los Altos School District recently entered contract with Metro Ed, Metropolitan Education, which is a career and technical education center that serves school districts countywide. So those of you who have gone to the Santa Clara County School Boards Association's events at Metro Ed in the past, they just had their Hoffman Awards there last week, I believe. And it's amazing, they have a culinary institute. And the entire event for probably, over, I want to say it was over 100 people easily, was put on by the students. They started preparing the food over 24 hours ahead of time, and they managed and ran the entire event, and it was incredibly impressive. So I think that when I look at home ec, what we think of as kind of traditional career and technology programs that we might have experienced in high school ourselves have really evolved to a much higher level. And the things that are possible and available, they also have all kinds of other programming at Metro Ed. But, it's even high school districts acknowledge that providing these specialized spaces and resources is something that is hard to do at your own specific site, but is much easier to coordinate. And also the staffing. They have just some incredibly high quality staff members. They have a really popular fashion and textile industry program as well, and a whole bunch of other things. So I'm curious if, Dr. Rudolph, if if we were interested in pursuing more CTE, if Metro Ed works with middle schools or not, I'm not sure.
I actually just Googled it because I thought it was just a high school district, which it is, which means that we would need to go through a different avenue to see for that.
All right. But I'm less inclined to prioritize. That's a nice to have program and not a need to have. I am more inclined to prioritize things that keep our facilities from falling apart and things that have to do with student safety on campus.
There are no further questions. Are there members of the public that wish to comment on our Measure T priority 2 list? Members of the public on this item. So we see one member. We'll hold on for a moment to let people chime in if there's others wishing to participate. And to raise, I should have been saying this each time, to raise your hand if you're calling on your phone, it's star 6 to raise your hand. We'll set we see one speaker. We'll set the timer for 3 minutes. Thank you, Dr. Ruff. And phone number 8176. You can unmute by clicking *6. You have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Yes, Chris, the system tells me that when you picked me and that I need to unmute by *6. I wanted to say that I absolutely agree with what Dr. Rudolph was saying. Your A priority, since we're down into 2, but your 2A priorities should definitely be the 3 sites that need the roof replacement. This isn't to remind particularly trustees Chang and Lambert, this item about these 3 sites having their roof replaced, those were priority A based on site surveys done at the time we first got on this board. Those 3 sites and all those classroom buildings were already on the priority A for people who look at roof age and say, you need to replace this roof. That way you're not going to have any leakage damage. Leakage damage always 100% cause dry rot underneath the roofs where they leaked. If you're lucky, you just have to replace plywood. If you're not lucky, you have to go into the walls and replace timbers and structural timbers in the walls that have started to rot. And then it gets really much more expensive. We're way past that time. And I'm glad to hear the superintendent. If you didn't hear him, I kept on hearing him say those 3 sites, which is about $4 million worth of roofing, are his top priority. So if you want to keep kids from getting mold in their classrooms, that's really what you have to do. So I hope all the members of the board, particularly Chris and Bill, talk about those are my A priorities. And I think the thing talking about the water, it was the drinkable water supply and the fact that there was a problem with lead in some of the fixtures that were put in schools before. And the issue is whether those have been tested after they've been sitting for like 2 weeks to make sure there isn't any lead leaching into the water that students drink out of the fountains. That's a crucial public health thing for small kids. I think some of those faucets were replaced just because of that. But I think that's one of the things that you need to make sure it's really a health thing. It really matters for mental development for young children who get exposed to lead. So both of those things I think need to be your A priorities. One, the $4 million for those 3 sites getting their aged roofs replaced because they're now leaking. It's been more than 10 years since Bill and I first got on the board.
Thank you. And former trustee Nelson, if there's further comments, please email the board. We will look forward to reading them. Comments from the board. And I'm just going to procedurally, I'm going to do my individual comments a long discussion. So at that very end, what I speak at the end would be try to be a synthesis of the board rather than my personal comments. So I'm going to do my best to try to kind of take notes as we speak to see what items you speak of has a clear consensus or majority so the district has some clear sense before May 30th.
And I do, sorry, we can bring this back on the 13th if you feel like you need more time to. Ideally, we like to move as fast as we can, but it doesn't mean that we necessarily have to move with such speed. So if you feel like more time is needed or you want to bring this item back, you're more than welcome to.
Thank you. And I see everyone's hands are up. I'm going to jump in and do my individual comments now so it doesn't get confused with the synthesis of the board later. So I'm only on the board with you for a few more weeks. So this is like the last chance you probably hear me say this, that when you've heard me say in the past about the ballot language of this bond, right? Well, we sent flyers to voters, but in the end, we know the one thing that all voters read is what's in the ballot statement. And the ballot statement, and to humor me, and when I read this again, it says to provide safe, modern classrooms and art and science labs at neighborhood schools for quality education. And we do a lot of the other things listed there, but in the fifth word there is talking about science and art and science and instruction. And like I fully agree with I'll put one tally for myself on, fully agree with the idea of roofs and long-term technology infrastructure. The reason I use that word, I'll explain in a moment. But so roofs, yes, and fiber to keep our 21st century education, yes. But then the one item that didn't make into the recommendation list was that the home education, basically, allowing our kids to learn to cook. Cooking is a powerful way to learn science. We have amazing cooks on the board here. And I know Dr. Rudolph and I, we've had long conversations about what's one of the key differences between a Midwest education and a California education is in the Midwest, middle schoolers, they learn to cook. And I hear that often when I talk with my partner who went to school in Indiana, a poor school district, but even though it's a very under-resourced school district, I've heard this story many times, so I can say with fidelity that in fifth grade, she learned to make bread. And in sixth grade, she learned to stir fry. In seventh grade, eighth grade, she learned to do a budget. And those are life-changing skills to learn to be competent in food and food science. We just heard from a lot of parents coming to us about the value of electives, the seeking electives in the middle school. That's the one item on here that's an instruction item. Others are safety and important, but that's the one item that means changing the quality of instruction in our classroom on this one level. And I think that providing a means to do future home education, I think it's something that I know that Dr. Rudolph has directly appreciated in his own education in the Midwest. And I think it's something that could resonate with all the comments we heard in past meetings with the, on that, I think that, how do you make that happen? Because it's on the recommendation list is that, I think we're spending too much money on like locks and security issues. Like school safety, as in the building integrity, yes, but then like perceived safety, whether it be fencing and more locks, cameras, things. And that's because there's $6 million on the recommended list for further access and perimeter control issues. That's a nice to have, in my opinion. Like our kids. That doesn't change instruction, and we haven't had a security issue like that. I think that if I was to think of a trade-off, to me, like foregoing further access control and things that, in my opinion, I respect why we do this, but then like we've already spent, we've spent $6 million already on locks in the first round. We spent $3 million on cameras. We spent 1.7 million on fencing, and now another 900,000 on Montaloma fencing. That's over $10 million on what in many ways is kind of like prison spending. In prisons, what they do, they build more locks and fences, right, and cameras. And this item here, the home ec, is the one instructional item. I would hope, I'm curious if with the board, if they think that that's something that maybe we should find some way to get into the priority list. Yeah, I think that's just I'm really curious if it's not on because the recommended list is provided to us, but it's up to the board to decide what is actually the final recommendations. I think the first, I think it was Trustee Lambert that I saw.
So I generally support the district's proposal here. Okay, I will. So I do agree with Trustee Chang that one thing I would recommend is to look for opportunities where we can spend bond money to enhance educational instruction. And I see the technology upgrade. I consider that as part of that proposal. As we've just pointed out, I see the home economics as part of that. But I would suggest that as a next step that the staff go to the school sites, talk with the teachers, the staff, talk with the site council, and maybe, like you said, it's been 5 years or so since we looked at that, and talk to them and see what else they could use, basically, really to focus on enhancing education for the kids. And yeah, those are my comments.
Trustee, President.
Thank you. Um, so I'm going to go through the things that I support prioritizing. I think where we're going to get into challenges is kind of the last few things, duking it out for the last pennies that are available. But I support all of the roof work. I support the technology upgrades because I think all of these impact instruction. Frankly, if you have mold in your building, it's going to impact instruction, and if your fiber optic network isn't working, it's going to impact instruction. And I, the utility service and survey and repair, where we haven't done that yet, we have to do that. That's also about, is the water safe to drink there? And then the thing that I want to see added into the recommended list that wasn't included is definitely the covered walkways on the second story of Castro, because I think that is a safety issue. And I don't know how many of the other trustees have gone up and down those stairs in the rain, but that whole, I wasn't on the board when that building was built, but the idea of doing that, I think it got done in drought and it just doesn't meet the needs of students or the school anymore. So I would really like to see that item not be cut. I think the frontage greening and the playground work, some of it could maybe get folded into a little bit our Green Schools initiative. And maybe some of, if there's leftover money from contingencies can go into that as well. It doesn't make sense to replace the playground and not include it in the design work that we're doing for the green spaces. So maybe we can tackle the design work there and then figure out how to cobble together funding for that. I'm not against home ec. I just think these are hard choices that we have to make. Back when Trustee Chang and Trustee Lambert, you were on the board previously, you had a bond where you guys got to do some really exciting things, like build new MURs, and the at the middle school campuses, the huge, over at Crittenden, for example, that huge STEM building that has all of these transparent walls, and you can move in and out of classrooms into this open space. Measure T Bond was not sexy. Measure T Bond was about maintenance work that needs to be done in the district that hasn't been done. And it's not exciting to or flashy to read about. It's not going to make big headlines. But if we could have a headline that says roofs, technology access and students being safe on campus are prioritized by the school district as basic needs. That's not a bad headline. Those are things we need to take care of. I am, dismayed that the perimeter control has come back as another $6 million. I don't think I'm the only one who's dismayed about that, but I'm open to learning more about why that's so expensive. I'm not going to write it off out of hand without more discussion. Because I've also been through lockdowns as a teacher when someone's in the neighborhood, and my own child has been through lockdowns at school because there's a domestic incident in the neighborhood and the police have called for a lockdown. And we've had a lockdown in our district almost every single year at some school site. So I'd be open to, just getting updated again on what that additional cost entails and why.
Yeah, so this one is, when we did the perimeter, and this isn't perimeter controls like fencing or anything else. This is simply the electronic lock system. So most of our schools, especially the older ones, so I'm thinking Landos, Amai, Mistral, Graham, Bub, and Therakov. And in some cases, some classrooms at Montaloma, they have multiple doors, and we had to pick which door we felt like was the door that got the electronic lock. But the backside, in most cases, the back door does not have the electronic lock. But we have transitioned away from the keys and are using our RFID keys now. And so this additional $6 million is simply to purchase the equipment and to install that equipment so that all the doors that are accessible to a classroom are addressed. And this request actually came from teachers as we were rolling out the locks, that they brought those concerns. So that's the only access control we have here is just the back doors of most of our classrooms do not have the same lock, and teachers would like for it to work that way.
Thank you. Trustee Berman?
I am inclined to go with the recommendation that Dr. Rudolph has given around the roof, the technology, and the covered walkways, especially because of the safety issue that President Conley has mentioned. But also, when I'm out there at Castro on the second story, I'm not really sure how the sun hits the building at what times, but I know that there's probably students that, and when they do group work or activities, just go right outside your classroom and read this book or work on this as a team. I mean, that's something that's really common for teachers to do with their class. And I think about that being, not something that the kids at Castro would be able to do. So having that extra shade, as we talk about greening and shade for kids, I think that this would be really helpful for the school to have. I agree with President Conley in terms of the kitchen, the home economics. I think it sounds really terrific. But however, I do think that if there were some extra funds, and I would wonder if the school sites, the leaders at the school, teachers would think that that's really where they would place the priority, right? So I think if there were extra funds that, because this list probably as our superintendent shared, hasn't gone back to the school sites. I don't want to speak for the school sites. I think that they probably have a list of priorities on their own. I do want to prioritize a couple of things, the students' experience. If once we sort of get all these structural pieces like the roof and the technology repaired, the student is prioritizing things that will enhance the student experience. Those are great things to prioritize. And I also just believe having parity between schools. So if we're seeing that some schools are prioritizing an item that perhaps exists at all the other schools, I would choose to go with making sure that those schools have those things. Does that make sense? So again, I think just to reiterate, I think if there are those extra funds, bringing it back to the school sites to see what they would prioritize, and then making decisions based on the feedback that we get and ensuring that there is parity across our schools.
As I'm taking note here, we've got two trustees say that supporting Castro, the covering, that's a 2.3 million project that's not on the recommended list. The recommended list is the Crittenden covering for 1.6 million. So is it two trustees? I just want to make sure I can discuss. Is it two trustees who are seeking to have the non-recommended Castro 2.3 million added to the recommendation list?
Add a third.
So that's three. Okay, and I know you have further comments, Trustee Blakely. Okay. So we just haven't spoken for the Crittenden, that thing that was on the recommendation list. This is an addition. Okay, but Trustee Blakely.
Thank you. You've all made great comments, and I'm generally in alignment. When I went through it, it was like roofs and technology, roofs. And so those are there. That's great. I tend to agree with Trustee Conley and Berman about the home ec facilities. It's not only just like building the infrastructure for being able to do it, but it's also hiring more staff. And there's just a lot of costs involved. And I think it's nice, but I'm not sure that I would prioritize it in front of other things. What I had looked at was frontage greening and the playgrounds one. there were playground ones that were in priority 2 that came off, but those are things I'm interested in, but I like Trustee Berman's idea of just double checking with the schools. And then the other thing is, in terms of the greening initiative, I think we had set aside like 7 million for each, or was it 700,000 for each school? So it could be that we just kind of divide that money up among the campuses. So 10 million minus like 2.5 or whatever it was for the Castro covered walkways, which I totally agree are necessary. That's going to leave us like 7.5. So that would be an extra, you know, $600,000 or $700,000 per school for kind of greening and playgrounds and all that. And I don't think that's a bad way to spend it, because I think, you know, as we've heard, some of the ideas that were proposed for Vargas were going to exceed that budget, and that's likely to happen across some of our other campuses. So thank you.
Yeah, I'm sort of looking forward to, you know, having the feedback from the school sites and site councils. I think they'll come up with a good list of what they need and things like that, you know, it's for me, it's premature to jump to a lot of conclusions because there's a lot of good ideas here. I support just about everything. But I do agree with the highest priorities, you know, with the roofs and, you know, these kind of things, and the water and but yeah, I hope to be guided by the school sites.
Just follow up with that, Trustee Lambert. Yeah, I appreciate that this process, by having it come to us first and then go to the school side, it's meant to kind of reduce the lobbying effect that we, if you and I recall, when there was when we did the Measure G. The downside of this is the school sites will get a defined list, right? So when we did Measure G, when we had a facility committee and things like that, it was more open-ended to community, as in like they kind of did their and they did their wish list kind of thing, as in like they weren't provided a prescribed list and say, okay, give us your feedback on this set of already defined items. They give feedback on what did they saw as their organic needs. Now, the downside to that was that Measure G ended up veering away from the facility plan, right? So like by us going back to the community and saying, just tell us what you need, it pushed us away from the facility plan that was developed before Measure G bond, which led to kind of some unfunded things that Measure T is now trying to do, right? So it's like, I recognize that this time around, when we go back to the community, the feedback they'll be giving us will be feedback on stuff that we've already decided, versus them kind of openly saying, oh, this is what we wish we had with your last few $1 million. With that.
Yeah, and I would just comment, I'm envisioning this as, you know, you're not doing huge big budget items, but, you know, it'd be sort of nice if I had, you know, 500,000 to do this, right? You know, but we're not talking about $5 million upgrades, right? For a little bit of money can go a long.
Yeah. Trustee Blakely?
Yeah, I knocked on a lot of doors for Measure T. We were still knocking on doors then. The COVID hadn't quite set in. And, you know, every time we explained, and we had like infograms, it was all the non-sexy stuff that hadn't been covered by Measure G. So it doesn't really feel inconsistent to me to prioritize things the way that we are. And I don't feel like we need to go back to the schools and say wish lists. You know, I think we can sort of direct them, because the community was involved in, you know, providing input. We had a number of sessions when we were doing the master facilities plan. So, you know, yeah, things can change as COVID, and thank goodness we had that for the HVAC. I mean, good on us. The HVAC helped. We thought it was going to help for fires, and it has and will, but it really helped for COVID. So, you know, I'm okay. I like the idea of going back to the schools, but I don't feel like we need to say pie in the sky.
Dr. Rudolph?
So yeah, it looks like Trustee Conley also wants to speak. So what I'm hearing is we will price out roofing technology as well as covered walkways, and we'll finalize the cost of that. And then sort of what I envision is each school site had a list of items that were already prioritized 1, 2, 3, and 4. And those would be the items that would be taken back to them. If something new popped up that just wasn't envisioned back then I think we can bring it back. But it won't be as much money as what we're thinking. The only item, I guess, I just want to make sure y'all are fine. So things like playgrounds and the doors, that you're fine with neither one of those being on, and that being a decision by staff and parent else. Okay.
Trustee Connolly?
Can I? Yes, thank you. What I think, having listened to the conversation kind of go around, it sounded like there were at least two people who largely supported the recommendations overall. Trustee Berman and Trustee Lambert, at least, and maybe Trustee Blakely as well. Okay, and I support the recommendations overall. I just wanted to add the Castro covered walkways on the second story.
There's a majority.
Because there's almost 11 million left. So of that 11 million, I want a piece of that for which there's 3 people for. So Dr. Rudolph, I think you're pricing out the things that are on the recommended list plus that one ad. And then that will leave something like, a little more than 8 million, maybe $8.5 million.
Okay.
I don't know that we want to do like a whole huge master facilities plan outreach process, but I'm wondering if it can be combined. I'm hesitant to go to the sites before we're also bringing them the designs for the greening projects, because I think we're going to see, as we talked about, Vargas and other greening projects go over. And it might be that the sites look at that and want to prioritize using, if they can have access to extra funds to meet some of the things from those designs. So it's almost, if we go back to the sites, I want it to be part of that process. But it might be that they say, hey, this is all great, but over at Mauna Loma, we really, really, really need to repave that staff parking lot. Can we have that as well? And that's where we get feedback. That makes sense. So I'm agreeing with you, Trustee Lambert, about getting the school input, but I think it needs to be part of the when they also look at the design plans too. And then if there are other needs at the site that aren't from the green spaces, but that are important that we haven't addressed, maybe that's where to get them.
Yep. Sorry. So, okay. Thanks for clarifying, because I think I wrote down staff recommendations and then I stopped writing those down and I focused in on the smaller items, which, yes, you're correct. That would reduce the amount of monies that are left. My recommendation then would be, since you have this large greening initiative, to fold the additional funds into that. And then I'm agreeing with Trustee Conley, like at that point, if there's some funds that are left over and we can split them amongst the sites, then we'll say like, hey, in addition to the greening initiative, is there something else that's a low dollar ad that we can put in? And we will add in, if since there's a board majority about covered walkways, we'll add the covered walkway to the recommended list.
Thank you, Dr. Ruff. To clarify, I see that there's a board majority on the district recommendation list. I know that Trustee Conley had initially had some reservations about the access control. I shared those reservations. I know that Dr. Rudolph had further explained what it was for. Was there any other board members who had reservations for the additional $6 million for access control, or is that part of their support for the recommended list?
I support it.
I mean, I am also stunned at the price. However, I think it's probably, I feel like it's a project we should finish and see to completion. And this is sort of the last part of it, and then it'll be done. But it is very expensive, yes.
I don't see it as a high priority item.
So Trustee Connolly, so I guess you would be the one to just like, is the access control being revisited, or you are in support with Berman and Blakely?
I'm gonna go with Trustee Blakely and Trustee Berman on this one in that, especially because the teachers are asking for it, that, you know, I've worked in one of those classrooms, right? So I know how it feels when you have a lockdown, and the idea that we can secure both doors instead of one. I'm a little flummoxed that it wasn't done in the first place. And I want to get it wrapped. And I agree the cost is just really painful, but once it's done, it's done.
So it's a board majority for the district recommendations then. This is kind of something that, you know, this will definitely come back after I'm not back on the, after I'm not on the board anymore. But when Trustee Lambert said, like, if there's some money left at the end, and which I imagine would be a long time from now when this priority 2 list is done, if there is money left, I just would encourage who's on the board that time to, you know, the ballot language still says art and science. And if we don't spend a single dollar on it, I think it's not faithful to the voters' intent. And it's a lost opportunity to provide enrichment for our kids. So at the end of this priority 2 list, if there's money for a priority 3 list, and again, I will not be on that board, I encourage us to have fidelity to the ballot language, which is, as much as we give flyers to people, in my mind, and I hope that when we do I hope when the board does future parcel taxes and bonds, what we put on the ballot statement, we really hold dear. Special themes are on the top of the sentence. It'd be one thing if art and science was like word, you know, the 5th sentence down, but it was literally intentionally first sentence there because it would generate voters, right? So I think we do have an obligation there if there's priority 3 coming down the line. And I just wanted to follow up when I earlier said about the supporting the long-term tech. I know on the recommendation list is projectors, and I just want to kind of give feedback to district and to the board that we've had past superintendents who often reminded us that that these bonds are like we were just told that we're just now paying off the former Wisman bonds. The payment out process, while we can have added bond capacity sooner, the process to pay off this entire bond is multiple decades, right? Usually about 20 years, right? Like we're just paying off bonds from before this district merger even happened. So former Superintendent Goldman often told us, don't put items on the list where the thing is going to break far before you pay it off, right? So it's like, if you're going to have a 20-year loan on something and you buy a piece of hardware that's going to last like 5 years, then you're paying off with interest, or now we, the taxpayers, are paying off with interest an item that's no longer even exists in the district. So the one item on here is I just urge us to, like, if it's something that we think doesn't have lasting ability, then that should be general fund or shoreline funds or site funds. It shouldn't be a bond because the interest rates are just too high. So the projectors on there, I wouldn't support the projectors for that reason. Projectors can't last 20 years. They barely can last 10 years. So I don't, as much as I think they're valued, $1 million in projectors should be another resource, not through a 20-year bond. That's just my feedback on that item. Are there last comments on this? Yeah.
I just wanted to make a quick one. I just did a little bit of math, taking the projected, if you took the recommended list, and it said that there was 10.895 million left over. And then I've subtracted the 2.327 for the Castro and came up with a little over 8.5 million. And then when you divide that by 11 schools, it's like $780,000 per school. So if we did allocate it towards the greening, that'd be roughly $1.5 million per school if we were dividing it evenly, which to me does not seem like an unrealistic budget for that. So just wanted to point that out.
And maybe a question for Dr. Duroff. On the slides, it was mentioned about the city. I know this was on our previous priority 1 list about those the public facility bathrooms that the kids cannot use during the school day. The city's 50% saying they'll pay for half. That's kind of like a change. Is that something, the decision on whether we continue with that, is that something that we have to give feedback now, or is that something that's going to come back to us? So us taking that offer of the city, is that something we need to say something on now, or that would come back to us later?
It'll come back to you later when the project moves a little bit forward. So it's been sort of holding right now. but we'll have to bring back all the schematic designs and everything else, and then you'll have to actually approve it. And within it, we'll capture an agreement with the city that they're compensating us for half.
I just have a quick question. Just based on something that Trustee Chang, Vice President Chang mentioned about the projectors, you know, that the expense, is it, I imagine that it's to sort of construct have the ability to ceiling mount those projectors that far back. Maybe that cost isn't necessarily just the cost of the actual projector. Am I correct? Because I imagine, yes, the life expectancy of a projector maybe isn't 20 years, but I wonder if it's just the ability to then have the projector there, which, yes, I think having those rolly carts, I've seen it get in the way. You can't quite get it right. It's sort of a hazard. There's movie nights. It's in the way of the kids who are trying to sit and watch the movie. So I do understand the desire to have that, but I wonder if that large expense isn't just the projector itself. It's just creating the ability to have that that structure in place so that, you know, moving forward, we can continue to have that ability to do that.
Correct. Your costs are mainly in electrical and mounting, because they both have to be approved through DSA. It's not so much about the actual device. The device is, I mean, it's pennies on a dollar. We can buy those with ease, but what we're paying for is the mounting.
And if I can add one thing to that, these are also rear projections, so it would include a screen and the mounting of the screen with that as well.
Could you say that one more time? Sorry, I didn't hear that.
So it's these particular projectors the district is looking at a rear projection, which would require a new screen as well. So there's other parts and pieces that go in, not just the projector itself.
Thank you.
Thank you for that clarification, Trustee Berman. Any last comments on this item? Oh, Trustee Conley, your hand's up. Yeah.
Yes, that just clarified something for me. So rear projection, meaning the projector will be mounted on like the back of the stage rather than at the other end of the auditorium. Is that correct?
It would still be ceiling mounted, so it would be up out of the way, but
Yes.
yes, it would be mounted above the stage rather than the seating area.
So would that address, you know, right now what I hear about with the projectors is it's actually very hard to see what's being projected onto the screen because there's so much light coming in to the MURs. Does that address that by being rear mounted like that?
Yeah, so the rear projection are known for being a bit brighter, and that we actually reviewed this with John Aker, and that's what he recommended as well from his perspective, for that exact reason.
Oh, okay. All right. That makes a lot more sense to me. I'm much more supportive of that, understanding that it addresses that issue in that way. Thank you.
A quick follow-up question to that, Mr. Gibb, on the rear projection. If teachers are wanting to use the projector to kind of like project like virtual staging for like performances and stuff, does this kind of better allow people to stand in front of a virtual projection, like for like a theater performance or something like that?
I think in this case, the screens are still mounted on the front side of the stage, so the space in front would be, you know, fairly limited. But I'd have to look into that a little bit further to be honest with you.
No further comments. Thank you, Mr. K, for your expertise, and thank you, Dr. Ruff. We are on to our last item. I believe, let's see, this was a item brought from a board member. So I don't know if is it the board member, and President Conley, you can chime in on.
This is so Trustee Lambert was going to lead the discussion on this item.
I'm going to turn this over to Trustee Lambert.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, President Conley and Dr. Udo for putting this on the agenda. So after what has been going on the last couple of months, it made me sort of, I was thinking hard about why sort of miscommunications seem to be happening and what we could do to improve them. And I have to admit, good. Well, the solution is among us, but I think that the issues had to do with our interactions as a board and the senior staff with the public. And yeah, and I, and, and, and also too, you're thinking about often just my personal experience. I feel that I come to a board meeting and receive the agenda a few days in advance, and I'm not fully informed and understand what the context is. It's a lot easier if I have a board meeting, a meeting with Dr. Rudolph, my one-on-one before a board meeting, but most of the time that doesn't happen. So I don't have an opportunity to really ask these questions and what are the way. And so what I'm looking for is, I think, a way to improve our interactions and also to enable us as a board to step up and take the responsibility for decisions, so that we become, you know, we own our decisions, and the public can basically address us and hold us accountable for our decisions, and rather than the senior staff. And thinking about ways to do that. I mean, personally, I would like to have more meetings with, Dr. Rudolph, so that I understand context. I think on many items that we know are going to be an issue and really involve the public, that we should really be proactive about holding study sessions and recognizing it takes everybody's time, but I think we really have an obligation to do that, because it's very difficult to generally discuss things at a board meeting. Especially this meeting has been much better than most, partly because it's a relatively short meeting and we're not here till 11 o'clock and trying to rush through the agenda. So that's sort of where I'm coming from with this. I'm looking for suggestions, but I really see maybe what's happened during the last couple of months as largely a governance issue, that we've sort of failed. Or we say we haven't failed so much, but we haven't been working optimally as a board, and we haven't been communicating as well as we could have with the senior staff. And at the end of the day, I want the public to hold us accountable for the decisions, for the policies where we have to do with, for the choices and trade-offs that need to be made. And that's sort of where I'm coming from. And I'm looking for recommendations, really.
Trustee Connolly? Thank you, Trustee Lambert.
If I may add, Trustee Lambert, when you discussed this item with me, you were discussing ways to get direct input from parents to the board. And so you had some ideas around possibly doing trustee office hours at different school sites. My understanding from what you had presented to me was that you were looking for ways for the trustees to get parent input as well. So I thought that's what the content of the discussion was. I'm quite happy to talk about these other things. I have no problem with that. But I did want to make sure we discussed that as well.
So that's a suggestion following on with the, like having more study sessions where the public can interact with us as well. But
okay.
To Devin's point, meeting with trying to set up some kind of mechanism whereby board members can meet with can have more opportunities to interact with the public. And it's not clear whether, to do that's a one-on-one or, or something, something of, formal mechanism ought to be set up. So I think that's a point of discussion.
To follow up with that idea of study sessions and how that could kind of help us navigate tough community issues. Like when I think about our most recent issue with the middle school schedule, Dr. Ruff, when the district staff went out to the school sites to do the town halls, if that wasn't a town hall, if that was a study session, I think that would have changed the tenor of that event, because I think then the public would be holding their elected officials accountable. The same information would be getting out there. Dr. Ruff, the staff would still present to the community as well as us, but then the feedback to the parents would be directed at us. And I fully agree with Trustee Lambert. Yeah, I've said this before, that like it's both democratic and it's to protect staff, their bandwidth and their attention to have the public on controversial issues. If study sessions would actually be a remedy, whether it have been the Montezuma fencing or the schedule, a study session as a means to present to the public puts the board in a place where the public would have to hold us accountable. Yeah.
Well, something else is, I'll add to that. I went and looked online. I've heard other board members talk about how they hold office hours. Some boards do it quarterly, quarterly there'll be 2 board members at the district office or at a school site, and it's open to the public. It's advertised several days in advance, and it's an opportunity for the public to be able to comment on items that they want to speak to with 2 board members present. The board members, because of the Brown Act, you'd limit it to 2. And then those board members would come back and report out to the rest of the board, how many people were in attendance, what were the issues that came up, and anything that seemed urgent or relevant to the work of obviously to the superintendent directly would get reported to the superintendent directly. So that was just one thing that I'd heard, and that seemed to happen quarterly. I did see in other websites that there was board members' office hours advertised, but it didn't seem really clear that was how that was happening. But the one that I saw more consistently was something that happened quarterly, and that board members would sign up, and they'd be like just a rotation. So that I just wanted to share that that's something that I heard. And perhaps there's a way to identify in the future if there's a larger topic that we think will take an extended period of time. How do we identify what is a study session item that we want to tag as a study session item? And I'm not really sure what process we follow, but we can probably predict what those items could be coming up.
Trustee Conley, or President Conley?
Yeah, so I like the idea of office hours as well. And I think quarterly would be a fine cadence. We could have 2 trustees there. Because of the Brown Act, we couldn't have more. But I love the idea of the trustees then reporting out to the board at an upcoming meeting, what issues rose to the top. Because I think, one danger of office hours is if we're rotating, let's say I go to Mauna Loma one month and then Trustee Berman goes to Landals the next month. And if we're not sharing it with the board or communicating it more broadly to the board, we don't actually know what community members of the different sites are saying. So I like that adds sort of a communication piece for the whole board and not just the 2 trustees in that study session, that everyone gets to hear about it afterward. And one idea might be to tie some of the study sessions to when we're doing our school site visits. So those visits are already scheduled on a regular basis. It doesn't mean we need to do office hours after everyone. I think the quarterly cadence sounds maybe like a good start to try it out and get people to sign up for. But it could be that then the office hours are held at one of the school sites after the tour in the morning or something, or after school that day or something like that. And then to the second point about study sessions, I think there are a couple of different things. Study sessions, we usually plan ahead of time for a big meaty topic, like when we were looking at the greening index and greening metrics, like when we discussed the redoing the lottery system for Stevenson Elementary School and Mistral for our choice programs. Also, when Mistral was looking at going from a 90-10 model to a 50-50 model. So the thing that I can think of most recently that would have been great for a study session might be the Castro redesign, but we kind of broke it out over multiple meetings instead of having multiple study sessions. That being said, I think it's easy in retrospect to say we should have called a special meeting about middle schools when things started to get complicated. And so if we look at that March 14th meeting, we didn't really start getting too much input about that until the following week. We didn't get a lot of emails that came in that Friday, but we started to get some the following week. And then the week after, and then we went on spring break was April, I'm trying to remember, because the town hall was, I think, April 1st, which felt like an incredibly fast turnaround to have a town hall. Yeah, because spring break was the next week. Spring break started on April 5th. So we had 2 weeks after the 14th, the meeting on the 14th, before spring break, or almost 3 weeks. And we didn't have a board meeting in that time, which I think is part of what hurt us, that we only have our 2 meetings in March were very early in the month. They were the 4th and the 14th. And then we didn't meet again until April 18th. And so I think to a certain extent, part of where the public was really frustrated about not being able to give feedback was that we weren't actually having another meeting until after spring break. And so in retrospect, I think calling a special meeting might have been appropriate. I don't know if there would have been new information to present, but it might have been a time to get more public input then rather than later. It's, in theory, the board president can call a special meeting at the drop of a hat, but I will say it's hard for one person to always know exactly when that point is. And I didn't think of doing a special meeting at that point because I knew there wasn't new information and I knew the town hall was coming and I didn't know how the town hall was going to go. So something that I would like to ask of you as my colleagues is, for myself as board president, but also for future board presidents, if now that we've kind of gone through this last experience, if you sense a moment that you think might call for an extra input point and a special meeting, please suggest it. And it could be in our board meeting, or it could be just, emailing the superintendent and whoever the board president is. Because I think that as much as I'd like to think that, one individual can steer the ship alone, that's not actually how our board functions anyways. We are all equal votes. And I think everyone on this board has served as board president at some point. And so I think everyone has a great wealth of experience to pull on to identify moments when maybe we do just need to pull the trigger and call a special meeting. For study sessions, usually we have more lead time on that. And so maybe what you're thinking of is a special meeting that only requires the 24-hour notice, but that is a study session, Trustee Lambert, which I also think is fine. But our regularly scheduled study sessions are things when we have kind of bigger topics and they're put on our schedule a few weeks ahead of time.
Trustee Lambert?
Yeah, I don't think we need to parse words about what we call a meeting. The point is that on items, there's items we know from experience that involve the public that they are going to react to. And we should be proactive about engaging them beforehand. And part of what, I agree with you 100% that all of us, have our own perspectives and have our own sense of when it's appropriate to do something like this, but we need a mechanism then to communicate that before it appears on the agenda a few days ahead of time. So something like this, it would have been great to get a heads up, maybe on the one-on-ones with Dr. Rudolph. Okay, this is coming to the board. What do you think of this, right? And that would enable us to then give our feedback through that time. And when we have, issues can move fast in the district, and maybe, at least to me, maybe one-on-one, once a month is just not enough, right? Because it can't capture those initiatives.
I see Trustee Blakely's hands up. We can hold on to that. I'm just gonna, because it's been a while, we'll open for public comments on, are there any members of the public who wish to speak on this item of trustee communication? Seeing no members of the public, though, we'll turn this over to Trustee Blakely.
Thank you. I do think there's a difference between special meetings and study sessions. And so I agree that there might be the time to call a special meeting. Sometimes we don't see that coming, but sometimes we do. And I'm thinking, like when the Bullis charter proposal came, I think we had some study sessions. We had other ones in my first term. I don't want to get too meeting happy. We meet much more frequently than any of the other school districts around here. But I think that's helpful both in terms of, our staying on top of things and communicating out to the public. So I don't necessarily wouldn't want to scale back the amount of times we meet, but I've worked on things where I'm trying to pull days that won't conflict with other elected officials. And we meet a lot. I know one time we had a board retreat some years back, and I think Greg Danis was leading it. And he said that he's been like the board president of his school board for a decade or something like that. He said that they often kind of have an open session for the first hour of their meeting, like they come in at 5 and had sort of a Q&A. I don't know that we necessarily need to do that, but it could be just developing a practice of trying to get here a couple of people when they can and letting the public know that we're going to be here a little bit early to talk. I do like the idea maybe of quarterly sessions that you're talking about, like two at each school. One other thought in terms of having more, they're not one-on-ones, but the high school district I know has 2-on-2s. And so I don't know if that would preserve Dr. Rudolph's time better if you could have 2-on-2s in a month as opposed to 1-on-1. But that's another option. That said, I feel like Dr. Rudolph is very available when there's things that come up and I need his input. I mean, you make yourself available, and I try not to say drop everything, I need to talk to you now, but we do get an opportunity to communicate with you. So you're very responsive, but I want to be respectful of your time. And to everybody's point of where the elected officials and the ire should be directed at us, I agree. And I'm not 100% sure how to change that, but I'm very open to ideas for working on it. Thank you.
Dr. Riddle?
Yeah, I mean, so I wrote down if you want, we can, I think if they're scheduled, it seems like it's easier for trustees. And so we could easily, so for instance, tomorrow I start reviewing all the presentations for the next board meeting. And so ideally, if we had this in place, ideally it would be easy as they're working on finalizing their decks after my feedback, maybe to do a 2x2 during the off week. And that gives you the opportunity to hear it before it's actually posted. And I can also bring in other senior staff. And then if we schedule it, then it's just a matter of everybody agreeing that these are the times. If you can't make it, you can't make it, but we can always make ourselves available and we can block in the time. And it's easy right now to think about this because next year's calendar is pretty wide open right now. So scheduling it in. And then we did ask, you now have access because we changed the lock. So your card reader does provide access there. So it is possible you can go out to sites or you could easily host office hours right after you met with senior staff to talk about things. So then you have, this is the board's conference room and you have 2 people who are here and it's a regular cadence. Because I think to some degree, having it scheduled allows for people to know when they can access you versus what we've been trying to do. And this is, I mean, I've been following a system that's been in place probably longer than what I have, which is it's always, at least that was conveyed to me, it was always presidents get one meeting. Sometimes that is morphed into two, depending on the president. And then everybody else gets one, but it doesn't have to be that way. So, but I think these may be two other ones. And then the only other thing I would suggest is maybe just thinking about when we're trying to do doodles about your time. If we knew up front that this Thursday of the month was a possible day to do a study session, or a Tuesday or something, and then everybody can hold it, I think that creates the opportunity that if someone says, we need a study session or a special meeting, because in both cases, you can call those within 24 hours, you at least know that you have the time set, that's sort of mutually agreed upon, even though life changes and everything else, but it's at least set. So I guess what I'm trying to say is the more we can create a schedule, I think the easier it is for all of us. Obviously, staff is going to adjust to your needs, but just thinking about when we've tried to schedule meetings in other instances, oftentimes it's about they're coming up so short notice that you've had other things, other commitments that you've made, but maybe being a little bit more proactive. So this, just hearing what you said, like we want to meet your needs. I think those are a couple ways that I offer my initial thoughts of thinking about it.
Dr. Ralph, something related to this that about this is not maybe communication to the public, but communication to the trustees. When there is a district recommendation that's going to be different from what's in the packet, I think it's beneficial, whether it be an email. I think sometimes it happens, but sometimes it didn't. And it kind of most pointedly that on the schedule change, I know I wasn't the only trustee that was surprised that we did not know, and after the fact we find out that some trustees knew beforehand that there was going to be a different recommendation and was in the packet, and some trustees didn't. So
I would just say, like, if I saw you minutes before, I mentioned that I was going to bring a different recommendation. I didn't call anyone, and I didn't say like, "Hey, this is what was going to happen." But as people walked in, I just said, "Look,
thank you for that context.
I'm gonna make a different recommendation, and I need to say something beforehand." And that's all I said. And so no one got a phone call or anything else, but I can keep that note if we're going to change to make sure that we update you too.
Real briefly, I see President Connolly, but some districts assign trustees to school sites as a rotational rep. Yeah, I know some districts vote by region, but even those who don't vote by region, they assign, like, we have 11 schools, right? And it's really hard. And I know that some trustees here get to a lot of events, but then if you are assigned for a set period of time to represent a school, it ensures that at least that school has people who are going to their evening events and kind of puts a face for a while for that school. President Conley?
Yeah, that assignment issue is something that's come up multiple times over the last 6 years that I've been on the board. I think there was a previous board that did it, and then when I came on the board wasn't doing it anymore. I like the idea of starting with the office hours. I agree, maybe starting with quarterly office hours, but trying them at the district office in the conference room. That might be a really good start, just to see if the community is interested and if they come. And then Dr. Rudolph, I don't know if you remember, but in my first year on the board, I came on and I, was learning a lot and I was a little anxious. And that's when I got to start writing in questions ahead of time to get them answered. So if I got my questions in by Tuesday regarding a board meeting on Thursday, so I'd read the packet on Friday and got my questions in by Tuesday, then I could get written answers ahead of time, which is wonderful. And then we had a retreat that year in January, and you, because I was wanting so much more kind of input, you agreed to meet with me one-on-one that year as I onboarded. And I think we only did that through that spring semester, and then I was fine going into the fall. But it was incredibly helpful for me that you took the time then to meet with me every week because I was new and I was trying to figure out how things worked and I wanted to know the context on things. So I also think, the 2x2s, if all of the trustees want to do 2x2s, I think that's great. But also if Trustee Lambert just wants to have a weekly meeting that's it, and other trustees don't feel like they need that extra meeting, I think that's fine too. It's not actually that much difference in your time, but I don't know if all the trustees want 2x2s.
I'm fine either way. I think just because all of y'all have been president, so we're on an every week cadence, and I think some of us appreciate it more than others. No, I don't take any offense to it, but I'm fine with scheduling them either way. We can. I think what would the request that I'm hearing is that it would make the job easier if there's an opportunity to interact a little bit more, and help allow you the opportunity to ask questions. And it will help us a little bit in terms of staff, because then we know, sort of understand what things come up. We can do that one-on-one. I think if you, so like Dr. Westover, last week, she could have went through the deck before it got posted and could have answered some of the questions. And I think just thinking about her time and everything else is easier if two people come in. But it doesn't mean that we can't do one-on-one. I'm flexible either way, as long as I understand what people want. If you're comfortable meeting with two people, so be, or if another person, if you want it to just be you, either way works for me. It's just easier for me to get it scheduled because I build the rest of my time around it.
I see, Trustee Lambert and President Conley, real quick, the closed session item, do you think 30 minutes will be enough for we are 30 minutes until 10? Or is that what
Yeah,
we still?
it shouldn't even take 30 minutes.
Okay. Trustee
I
Lambert?
just have a real brief comment. I like the idea of being on site to having office hours on site to meet with parents. And, I don't know exactly what times would work and things like that. I'm almost envisioning, if certain schools have extra offices, and just sort of be there and all day long and available to meet with parents. And, but what I do think is most important is have a regular schedule and have it known in advance so that parents can know that you're going to be there. They might have a question 1 month and then they say, well, I know I can talk to the trustees at such and such a date. And then if I miss that, I can meet at such and such a date, so that there's a regular availability and predictability to the process.
Thank you. Trustee Conley, a hand has come down. And thank you, Trustee Lambert. I think that just like occasionally calibrating us, like just like us discussing our own performance in this matter, I think it's actually more useful than the retreats, in the sense that retreats is like things get pent up all year and then they're long. So like having these items that when things come up, that the future, you guys are on the board are continuing to on some basis you examine how we perform, I think is more useful than the annual retreats we've had in the past. That being the last item on here, are the members of the public who wish to address the board on items on the closed session agenda? And we have one item, which is public employee discipline, dismissal, and release. Any members of the public wishing to speak on the closed session? Seeing none, the board is now go into closed session. We'll report that there was no action taken in closed session. Board updates, recognizing we only have like a minute. There's no board updates on that. And then our next board meeting will be on May 30th with that. And at this 10 o'clock or 9:59, we close out this meeting.